The Godskin apostles predate the Erd Tree's dominance, hinting at a forgotten age of divinity. And within that single revelation lies a truth that unravels everything you thought you understood about the lands between. These robed hunters, draped in the flayed flesh of gods themselves, are not mere enemies placed in dungeons for you to overcome. They are remnants of a cosmic war, survivors of a theological purge, walking monuments to a time when the Golden Order did not exist and when divinity wore a different face entirely. Their existence poses a question that echoes through every catacomb, every windmill village, every spiraling tower where their emaciated forms wait in shadow. If the Erd Tree and its Golden Order represent the supreme and eternal truth of this world, why do these heretics carry weapons designed specifically to kill gods? And why does their very skin tell the story of divine beings who fell long before Marika ever ascended? The answer is not hidden in a single item description or a solitary piece of environmental storytelling. It is woven through the entire architecture of Elden Ring's world, threaded through incantations that smell of ancient smoke, through the design of weapons that remember the texture of divine flesh, through the placement of duo boss fights that suggest coordination across impossible spans of time, and through the haunting presence of a queen whose very title, the Glomide Queen, evokes a twilight era when the gods themselves learned to fear death. This is not a story of villains. This is a story of a faith that was defeated but never destroyed, of apostles who serve a dead goddess with the same fervor that Golden Order fundamentalists serve Marika, of a time when destined death was not sealed away but wielded as a sacred black flame, and of the terrible price the Erd Tree paid to bury that history beneath centuries of golden light. Every godskin you face is a historical document written in sinew and scripture. Every black flame incantation you cast is a prayer to a dethroned divinity. Every piece of their armor, every weapon they wield, every location they inhabit speaks to a conspiracy of silence that the Golden Order has maintained since its inception. The Godskins are not an anomaly in the world of Elden Ring. They are the original faith, the first apostasy, the proof that Marika's order was built not on virgin soil, but on the mass grave of an earlier divinity. To understand why they exist, why they hunt, why they skin the gods and wear their flesh as both armor and sacrament, you must understand that the history of the lands between is not a single golden thread, but a palimpsest, a manuscript where one story has been scraped away to make room for another, and where the earlier text still bleeds through if you know where to look. The Godskins are that earlier text. They are the words that were meant to be erased, and the fact that they still walk, still hunt, still burn with black flame in an age of gold means that the erasure was incomplete. This is the story of what came before the before, of the age that predates the age of the Erd Tree, of the Glomide Queen and her apostles who served death itself as a divine principle. It is the story of how Marika and her god-slaying weapon, her black blade Malekith, waged a war not just against rival demigods, but against an entire theological order, and how that war required not just victory, but historical revision on a scale that would make every grace-guided tarnished believe the Golden Order had always been the only order. It is the story of how the Godskins survived that purge, scattered across the lands between like seeds of a forbidden gospel, waiting in temples that predate the Erd Tree's roots, in villages where heresy is passed down through generations, in hidden sanctuaries where the black flame still burns in defiance of the golden light. It is the story of their weapons, the Godslayer's greatsword, and the Godskin peeler, and the Godskin stitcher, each one a theological argument, made in steel, each one designed with the specific intention of piercing divine flesh and negating the immortality that gods claim as their birthright. It is the story of their incantations, the black flame that does not simply burn, but reduces maximum health, a flame that remembers when death was not sealed but sacred, when to die was not a curse, but a cosmic necessity even for the divine. It is the story of their armor, the Godskin Noble set and the Godskin Apostle set, garments that are not merely clothing, but relics of a ritual practice, the physical evidence of a belief system that holds the flesh of gods as the ultimate sacrament, the final proof of divinity's mortality. It is the story of their physiology, the way the nobles are corpulent and rolling while the apostles are emaciated and stretching, two body types that suggest not random design, but symbolic meaning, perhaps representing different aspects of their faith or different stages of their transformation. It is the story of their locations, the way they appear in Caelid's Divine Tower and Volcano Manor and the Spirit Caller Cave and Crumbling Farum Azula, each placement telling you something about the geography of their faith, about where their order once held power and where it still clings to existence. It is the story of their connection to destined death, to the rune of death that Marika would eventually steal and seal and give to Malekith to guard, the same rune that the gloam-eyed queen once wielded through her godskins, the same rune that made the black flame not just fire, but the ontological negation of immortality itself. It is the story of the windmill villages, where the Godskin Apostle waits at the peak and where the villagers dance in ecstatic worship, flaying their own skin in imitation of their gods, a practice so disturbing that it can only make sense if you understand that for the Godskins, the removal of skin is not mutilation, but apotheosis, not violence, but sacrament. It is the story of the duo fights, the Godskin duo in Crumbling Farum Azula, and the way they resurrect each other, a mechanic that is not just difficulty design, but narrative design, showing you that the Godskins operate as a collective, that they are bound by something deeper than mere alliance, that their faith creates a connection that transcends individual death. It is the story of Crumbling Farum Azula itself, that city outside of time where the Godskins still perform their rituals, long before the Erd Tree stretched its golden boughs across the lands between, before Queen Marika the Eternal claimed dominion over life and death itself. The world knew a different sovereign. In the ancient pre-Erd Tree era, when the laws governing existence remained fluid and contested, a figure of terrifying power emerged from the primordial darkness. She was known as the Gloam-Eyed Queen, and her very name spoke to the twilight realm between life and death that she commanded. Where Marika would later seek to banish death from the world, the Gloam-Eyed Queen embraced it, wielding destined death as both scepter and crown. This was an age when divinity itself could be challenged, when gods walked in fear of powers greater than themselves, and when the natural order included the death of even the most exalted beings. The gloam-eyed queen's authority derived from her control over one of the most fundamental forces in existence. Destined death, the principle that all things must eventually end, flowed through her like breath itself. This was not merely the death of mortals, the quiet fading of men and beasts that all civilizations had witnessed since time immemorial. The power she commanded reached far higher, extending even to the divine. Under her dominion, gods themselves could be slain, their immortal essence snuffed out like candle flames in a storm. This made her unique among the deities and empyreans of her age. Where other powers sought to preserve themselves through various means, building monuments to their eternal glory or hiding from the ravages of time, the gloam-eyed queen stood as death's own avatar, unafraid of the very force that made all other beings tremble. Central to her terrible majesty was the black flame, a manifestation of deathly power unlike any other force known to the lands between. The black flame burned with a darkness that seemed to consume light itself, twisting and writhing with energies drawn directly from the rune of death. Where ordinary fire might char flesh and bone, the black flame did something far more profound and irreversible. It burned away life at its most fundamental level, unraveling the very essence of divinity. A wound inflicted by the black flame would not heal through conventional means, no matter how powerful the victim's regenerative abilities. Even gods, beings whose flesh could typically reconstitute itself from grievous injuries, found themselves vulnerable to this primordial fire. The flame reduced divine flesh to ash and memory, leaving nothing behind but the faint scent of twilight and the echo of mortality. The origins of the black flame itself remain shrouded in the mists of that ancient age, but its connection to destined death was absolute. The gloam-eyed queen had somehow learned to channel the rune of death's power, transforming its abstract principle into a tangible, weaponized force. This was no mere sorcery or incantation learned from dusty tomes. The black flame represented a fundamental understanding of death's role in the cosmic order, a mastery so complete that the queen could grant portions of this power to her most devoted followers. The flame became both symbol and substance of her divine authority, a visible manifestation of her dominion over the final fate of all living things. To serve this dark goddess and spread her doctrine of inevitable death, the gloam-eyed queen established an order of devoted zealots known as the Godskin Apostles. These were not ordinary cultists or temporal warriors pledging their swords to a cause. The apostles represented something far more intimate and absolute in their devotion. They worshipped the gloam-eyed queen as the supreme divine figure, the one true goddess whose dominion over death made all other claims to godhood seem hollow and temporary. Their faith was not built on promises of paradise or threats of damnation, but on the simple, undeniable truth that all things, even gods, must eventually end. In the gloam-eyed queen, they saw the ultimate expression of this cosmic law, and they dedicated their entire existence to serving her will. The Godskin Apostles did not merely preach their dark gospel or perform ritual observances in hidden temples. Their worship took a form both practical and deeply disturbing, one that would echo through the ages and leave its mark on the very landscape of the lands between. The apostles practiced the sacred art of flaying, stripping the skins from the bodies of gods and demigods they hunted down and slaughtered. This was not simple butchery or the work of madmen. In the theology of the Godskins, the flesh of divinity held profound significance. A god's skin represented the boundary between their immortal essence and the mortal world, the physical manifestation of their power made tangible. By wearing these divine hides as garments, the apostles believed they could partake in godhood itself, wrapping themselves in the very substance of divinity. The practice served multiple purposes within the Godskin faith. On the most practical level, the skins of gods provided protection beyond what any mortal armor could offer. Divine flesh, even separated from its original owner, retained properties of resilience and power. An apostle wrapped in godskin could withstand blows that would shatter ordinary warriors, could resist magics that would reduce common soldiers to ash. But beyond mere protection, the wearing of godskin represented a profound theological statement. Each skin was a trophy, proof that another so-called immortal had fallen before the inevitability of death. Each hide was a sermon written in flesh, declaring that the gloam-eyed queen's power exceeded that of any other deity. The apostles did not simply kill gods, they unmade them, reducing divine beings to material components, to garments and trophies that could be worn and displayed. The black flame became the godskin's sacred weapon, cultivated and refined through techniques passed down from the gloam-eyed queen herself. The apostles learned to channel this deathly fire through their bodies, wreathing their weapons in its dark radiance, hurling it at their enemies in devastating incantations. They developed entire schools of combat and magic centered around the black flame's unique properties. Some apostles specialized in coating their long, sinuous blades with the flame, creating weapons that could carve through divine flesh as easily as a knife through silk. Others learned to summon pillars of black flame from the ground itself, creating barriers of death that no living thing could cross. The most skilled could even transform their own bodies into vessels of the flame, becoming living pyres of mortality that burned away the immortality of anything they touched. As the Godskin Order grew in power and number, a hierarchy naturally emerged. While all apostles were formidable, some rose above their brethren to become truly legendary figures of terror. These elite warriors were known as the Godskin Nobles, and they represented the pinnacle of what a servant of the Glomide Queen could achieve. The nobles were massive in stature, their bodies swollen with the accumulated power of countless divine skins they had claimed. Where the apostles were lean and serpentine in their movements, the nobles possessed an imposing bulk that spoke to their elevated status. They wielded colossal weapons, great swords and stitchers that required inhuman strength to lift, let alone swing in combat. Their mastery of the black flame exceeded that of ordinary apostles, allowing them to conjure conflagrations of deathly fire that could consume entire battlefields. The Godskin nobles served as the Glomide Queen's personal enforcers, the instruments through which her will was imposed upon the world. When a particularly powerful god needed to be brought low, when a demigod's stronghold required assault, the nobles would be dispatched. They combined raw physical might with sophisticated command of dark magic, making them nearly unstoppable in combat. Their very presence on a battlefield could turn the tide of conflicts, as even the bravest warriors would falter when faced with these massive, skin-clad juggernauts, wreathed in flames that promised true and final death. The nobles answered only to the queen herself, and through them, her dominion over death was enforced across the lands between. The Glomide Queen's seat of power, the heart of her dark domain, remains a subject of scholarly debate and speculation, even in the current age. The most compelling evidence suggests her throne stood somewhere in the mountain tops of the giants, that frozen realm where the very sky seems closer and the boundaries between worlds grow thin. The mountaintops have always been a place where ancient powers converge, where the primordial forces that shaped the world still linger in concentrated form. The deathly energies that the queen commanded would have found natural resonance in those heights, where the cold itself seems to slow life to a standstill, where the air grows thin and mortal breath comes hard. Alternatively, some scholars point to Farum Azula, the crumbling tempest city that exists outside the normal flow of time, as the likely locations of her court. That ancient place, home to powers that predate even the dragons, would have provided an appropriate setting for a goddess whose authority challenged the very concept of immortality. Regardless of where her primary stronghold stood, the Godskin Order established outposts and centers of worship throughout the lands between. These locations served as bases from which the apostles and nobles could launch their hunts, as temples where the black flame was tended and studied, as repositories for the divine skins they collected. The divine tower of Kaled became one such stronghold, its heights claimed by the Godskins as a place of power. The tower's elevation and its connection to the cosmic forces that governed the lands between made it an ideal location for conducting the dark rituals central to Godskin worship. Here, apostles would gather to meditate on the nature of death, to practice their arts of flaying and flame, to prepare themselves for the sacred hunts that defined their existence. The windmill villages, scattered across the lands between, also fell under Godskin influence during this era. These settlements, with their distinctive architecture and their own peculiar customs, became centers of death worship. The villagers who dwelled there adopted practices that honored the Glomide Queen and her doctrine of inevitable mortality. The windmills themselves, with their constant turning motion, came to symbolize the cycle of life and death, the endless rotation that brought all things eventually to their end. In these villages, the Godskins found willing converts and useful servants, mortals who could provide support and intelligence for the apostles' god hunting expeditions. The villages became known for their festivals celebrating death, their rituals that welcomed the end rather than fearing it, their complete acceptance of the Glomide Queen's philosophy. From these scattered strongholds, the Godskins launched their campaigns across the lands between. Their influence spread like a dark stain, reaching into every corner of the realm. Demigods who had thought themselves secure in their power suddenly found themselves hunted, stalked by apostles who moved with serpentine grace and struck with weapons wreathed in black flame. Divine beings who had ruled unchallenged for centuries discovered that their immortality was not absolute, that death could come for them just as surely as it came for the lowliest mortal. The Godskins' hunts were methodical and relentless. They studied their prey, learning the patterns and weaknesses of each target. They struck without warning, appearing from shadows or descending from heights, their black flames burning away divine protections before their blades found flesh. Each successful hunt added to the Godskins' power and prestige. Each new divine skin claimed became another testament to the Glome-eyed Queen's supremacy. The Order accumulated a macabre collection of trophies, hides torn from beings whose names had once inspired awe and worship. Some apostles specialized in hunting specific types of divine beings, becoming experts in the particular techniques required to bring down dragons, or giants, or the various demigods spawned by the unions of greater powers. Others preferred to work in pairs or small groups, coordinating their attacks to overwhelm even the most formidable opponents. The nobles, with their greater power, often hunted alone, seeking out the most dangerous prey as tests of their own abilities and as offerings to their dark goddess. This reign of terror could not continue indefinitely without attracting opposition from other powers. As the Godskin Order's influence grew, as more and more divine beings fell to their black flames and flaying knives, the Glomide Queen's ambitions brought her into direct conflict with another rising power. Queen Marika the Eternal, who would eventually establish the Golden Order and claim dominion over the lands between, was in the process of consolidating her own authority during this era. Marika's vision for the world stood in stark opposition to everything the Glomide Queen represented. Where the dark goddess embraced death as the natural and necessary end of all things, Marika sought to banish death entirely, to create an eternal golden age where nothing would ever truly end. Marika, with her characteristic strategic brilliance, immediately recognized the Glome-eyed Queen and her Godskin followers as the single greatest threat to her emerging Golden Order. The Black Flame's ability to slay gods directly undermined the foundation of Marika's planned regime. How could she promise eternal life under the Erd Tree's grace if death itself could still claim even the divine? How could she establish an unchanging order if the Glomide Queen's apostles continued hunting and killing the very demigods and gods who were meant to serve as the Golden Order's immortal pillars? The two goddesses' philosophies were fundamentally incompatible, their visions for the world mutually exclusive. One of them would have to fall, and Marika had no intention of being the one to yield. The conflict between these two divine powers was not merely philosophical or abstract. It represented a genuine existential threat to Marika's ambitions, and from her perspective, to the future of the lands between itself. Marika envisioned a world of order and permanence, where the chaos and uncertainty of the ancient age would be replaced by eternal golden stability. The Glomide Queen's continued existence, her mastery over destined death, made that vision impossible to achieve. As long as death remained a force in the world, as long as even gods could be slain, Marika's promised eternity would remain a hollow promise. The Golden Order could never truly take root while the black flame still burned. To eliminate this threat, Marika turned to one of her most trusted and powerful allies. Malekith, known as the Black Blade, was Marika's half-brother, a being of immense power and absolute loyalty. Malekith was no ordinary warrior or champion. He possessed abilities and attributes that made him uniquely suited for the task Marika had in mind. As a shadow-bound beast, Malekith combined bestial ferocity with divine power, creating a warrior unlike any other in the lands between. Marika tasked him with a mission of supreme importance, one that would determine the fate of the world itself. He was to seek out the Gloam-eyed Queen, defeat her in combat, and claim destined death itself, sealing it away so that Marika could establish her deathless golden order. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reshape the fundamental laws governing existence in the lands between, a battle between two champions representing diametrically opposed visions of what the world should be. The reign of the Gloam-eyed Queen, formidable as it was, could not endure forever. Marika the Eternal, ascending to godhood through her communion with the greater will, recognized the existential threat posed by the black flame and its wielders. The ability to slay gods themselves represented an intolerable challenge to the new order she sought to establish. To secure her dominion and protect the nascent Golden Order, Marika dispatched her most fearsome champion, a beast of unfathomable power who would become known as Malekith the Black Blade. This creature, half-brother to Marika herself through their shared origin with the Greater Will, possessed strength that eclipsed even the mightiest Empyreans. His mission was singular and absolute: claim the Rune of Death from the Gloam-eyed Queen and end her dominion over mortality itself. The confrontation between Malekith and the Gloam-eyed Queen remains shrouded in mystery, with no texts surviving to document the battle in detail. What we do know comes from fragments preserved in weapon descriptions and the whispered memories of those who witnessed the aftermath. Malekith descended upon the queen with savage ferocity, his claws rending through her defenses. The black flame that had consumed gods rose to meet him, but the beast proved immune to its divine lethality. Where others had fallen before the incinerating power of destined death, Malekith endured. The battle raged across landscapes that would later be forgotten, erased by the Golden Order's systematic purging of inconvenient history. In the end, Malekith's jaws closed around the very essence of the Queen's power. He tore the Rune of Death from her divine form, stripping away the fundamental authority that had made her an Empyrean chosen by the Two Fingers. Without this fragment of the Elden Ring, the Gloam-eyed Queen's connection to destined death severed like a cut thread. Her black flame, once capable of permanently ending the lives of immortal beings, guttered and dimmed. The defeat of their goddess sent shockwaves through the Godskin Apostles' entire hierarchy. These beings, who had walked as living instruments of divine will, suddenly found themselves bereft of purpose. The black flame they wielded, though still dangerous, no longer carried its full potency. Where once their incantations could reduce gods to ash that would never regenerate, now the flames merely burned, hot and terrible, but no longer absolute. The apostles gathered in their hidden sanctuaries, attempting to comprehend how their eternal queen could have fallen. Some refused to believe the reports, insisting that she merely slumbered, waiting for the proper moment to return. Others recognized the truth with bitter clarity. The age of the Gloam-eyed Queen had ended, and with it, their mandate to hunt and flay the divine. Without central leadership or divine guidance, the Godskin Order fractured. The apostles and nobles, who had once moved in coordinated campaigns across the lands between, now found themselves isolated, hunted by the ascending Golden Order's forces. Marika's warriors swept through known Godskin strongholds, putting torch to their temples and scattering their congregations. Many apostles chose to flee rather than face annihilation. They dispersed across the realm, seeking refuge in forgotten places where the Golden Order's reach had not yet extended. Some descended into the depths of ancient ruins, places that predated even the Glomide Queen's reign. Others climbed to isolated peaks or retreated into dense forests where civilization feared to tread. A select few, the most cunning and adaptable, chose a different path entirely. They shed the obvious trappings of their faith, concealing their true nature beneath robes and masks that mimicked the appearance of ordinary monks, scholars, and wandering priests. These infiltrators would prove to be the most dangerous remnants of the old order, for they could move through Golden Order society undetected, always watching, always waiting for an opportunity to strike. Those apostles who refused to abandon their faith entirely sought out places where they could continue their worship in secret. The Divine Tower of Kaled, a structure that had once served as a conduit for divine power during an earlier age, became one such refuge. The tower stood isolated in a harsh landscape, far from the centers of Golden Order power. Its height offered visibility of approaching threats, while its ancient construction provided defensible positions against any assault. Here, a cabal of Godskin apostles established a hidden stronghold. They converted the tower's upper chambers into ritual spaces, inscribing the walls with prayers to their fallen queen. The black flame they kindled in these ceremonies no longer possessed its former might, but the apostles refused to let it die entirely. They experimented with the flame, seeking ways to restore its divine lethality. Victims were brought to the tower, travelers and wanderers who would not be missed, and subjected to terrible experiments. The apostles flayed them in the old way, stitching their skins into new garments and burning their remains in black flame, searching for some spark of the power they had lost. These dark rituals continued in secret for generations, the tower becoming a place of whispered horror in the surrounding lands. Far to the north, in the highlands, where the wind never ceased its mournful song, other godskins found a different sort of sanctuary. The windmill villages, isolated communities that had long practiced traditions outside the mainstream of lands between culture, welcomed the fleeing apostles. Or perhaps welcomed is the wrong word. The truth of what transpired in these villages remains unclear, but the result is undeniable. The villagers, whether through coercion, corruption, or genuine conversion, adopted the Godskin faith as their own. They transformed their festivals and celebrations into grotesque parodies of joy, dancing with manic energy around effigies and pyres. When the apostles required new skins for their sacred garments, the villagers provided them, sometimes offering their own flesh, sometimes capturing outsiders who wandered too close to their domain. The windmills themselves, structures built to harness the constant gales for grinding grain, took on new purpose. Their turning blades became symbols of the endless cycle the Godskins revered, the stripping away of old forms to reveal the divine essence beneath. The villages held festivals where victims were flayed alive, while dancers whirled in ecstatic celebration, their movements accompanied by discordant music that carried for miles across the hills. These celebrations served multiple purposes. They were acts of worship, demonstrations of devotion to the Glomide Queen, and practical necessities for maintaining the apostles' supply of human skin. The Golden Order, focused on consolidating power in more strategic locations, initially overlooked these remote communities, allowing the Godskin presence to take deep root. The Black Flame itself underwent a fundamental transformation following the Queen's defeat. Before Malekith's victory, the flame had been a direct manifestation of destined death, the principle that all things must end. When the Godskins wielded it against gods, the flame didn't merely kill their physical forms, but erased their capacity for resurrection or regeneration. The death was permanent, absolute, final. After the rune of death was torn away, this ultimate quality diminished. The black flame remained a formidable weapon, capable of inflicting grievous wounds that burned with unnatural persistence. It could still harm gods and immortal beings, causing them genuine pain and damage, but it could no longer guarantee their permanent destruction. A god struck down by the weakened black flame might recover, given time and the proper conditions. This diminishment represented a catastrophic loss for the Godskins, reducing them from executioners of the divine to merely dangerous heretics. Yet the apostles who survived refused to accept this new limitation as permanent. They preserved the techniques for kindling and shaping the black flame, passing them down through careful instruction. They maintained that the flame's true power remained, merely sealed away, and that with sufficient understanding and devotion it could be restored. Malekith, having claimed the Rune of Death, did not keep it for himself. His loyalty to Marika was absolute, his purpose defined entirely by service to his sister and goddess. He brought the rune to her, offering it as tribute and weapon both. Marika recognized the terrible power contained within this fragment of the Elden Ring. Destined death, the principle that all things must eventually end, represented both a threat and a tool. In the hands of enemies, it could be used to destroy her and everything she had built, but properly controlled, it could serve as the ultimate deterrent, a final sanction against those who would challenge the Golden Order. Marika made a decision that would echo through all the ages to come. She entrusted the Rune of Death back to Malekith, commanding him to seal it away within his very being. The beast complied, binding the rune into his flesh and then sealing it further within a blade forged specifically for this purpose. This weapon, Malekith's black blade, became the only means by which destined death could be unleashed in the world. And Malekith himself became its guardian, the sole keeper of true mortality in a realm where the Golden Order sought to establish eternal life for the faithful. He took up residence in a hidden location, removed from the daily affairs of the Golden Order, emerging only when Marika required his services or when threats to the rune itself manifested. With the Gloam-eyed Queen defeated and her power sealed away, the Golden Order moved to erase her from history entirely. This systematic suppression of knowledge went beyond simple censorship. Marika's scholars and priests worked to remove every reference to the Queen from accessible records. Texts that mentioned her were seized and destroyed. Monuments that bore her symbols were defaced or demolished. Survivors who had witnessed her reign were encouraged, through persuasion or threat, to forget what they had seen. The two fingers, those enigmatic envoys of the greater will, ceased to speak of her entirely, as if she had never been chosen as an Empyrean at all. This erasure proved remarkably effective. Within a few generations, most inhabitants of the lands between had no knowledge of the Gloam-eyed Queen's existence. Those who did remember spoke only in whispers, afraid that even mentioning her name might draw the Golden Order's wrath. The Queen became a ghost in history, a void where a goddess had once stood. Yet complete erasure proved impossible. The Godskins themselves served as living proof of her existence, and while the Golden Order hunted them, they could never quite eliminate every last apostle. More importantly, artifacts from the Queen's age survived, hidden in forgotten caches or preserved by those who valued heretical knowledge. Among these surviving artifacts, few proved as significant as the Godskin swaddling cloth. This item, a length of supple leather, stitched from the skins of multiple victims, had been worn by the Gloam-eyed Queen herself during her reign. The cloth possessed properties that transcended mere material, infused as it was with the Queen's power and the black flame's essence. Those who wrapped themselves in it found their wounds healing when they struck down enemies, as if the act of inflicting death restored their own vitality. The cloth had been hidden away when the Queen fell, secreted by loyal apostles who recognized its value. It passed through many hands over the subsequent ages, sometimes lost, sometimes rediscovered, but never destroyed. Other artifacts persisted as well. The Godslayer's greatsword, a colossal blade that had been wielded in the queen's service, remained hidden in a secret location, its black flame still flickering along the blade. Incantations that invoked the black flame were preserved in forbidden texts, copied and recopied by heretical scholars who refused to let the knowledge die. These remnants ensured that the Glomide Queen's legacy could never be completely extinguished, no matter how thoroughly the Golden Order tried to erase her. The Godskin nobles, those bloated and terrible beings who had served as the Queen's elite warriors, proved particularly resilient in the face of persecution. Their immense physical power and mastery of the Black Flame made them difficult to kill, even for the Golden Order's finest warriors. Several nobles managed to secure positions in locations that offered protection from direct assault. One such noble took up residence in the Volcano Manor, the fortress home of the recusants who rejected the Golden Order's authority. Here, in the manor's depths, where molten rock flowed through ancient channels, the noble found a kind of sanctuary. The manor's lord, himself opposed to the Golden Order, saw value in harboring such a powerful being. The noble served as both guardian and symbol, a living reminder that powers older than the Erdtree still existed in the world. Another noble established itself in the depths of Liurnia, in a temple submerged beneath the region's sprawling lakes. The water provided natural protection against assault, while the temple's ancient construction offered spaces suitable for the noble's bulk. These nobles retained much of their former strength, their bodies still capable of the rolling attacks that had crushed armies in the Queen's service. They waited in their lairs, patient as only immortal beings can be, confident that the Golden Order's dominance would eventually falter. The Apostles, more numerous and adaptable than their noble counterparts, pursued various strategies for survival. Many continued to seek power actively, refusing to accept their diminished status. They studied the Black Flame obsessively, conducting experiments and rituals aimed at rekindling its true lethality. Some apostles theorized that the flame's power had not truly vanished, but merely been suppressed, sealed away just as the rune of death had been sealed. If they could find the right ritual, the correct sacrifice, perhaps they could pierce that seal and restore the black flame to its former glory. These efforts led them to seek out sources of ancient power, places where the boundaries between the physical and metaphysical grew thin. They excavated ruins from ages that predated even the Glomide Queen, searching for knowledge that might aid their quest. They captured sorcerers and scholars, torturing them for information about the fundamental nature of death and flame. They even attempted to track down Malekith himself, hoping to steal back the Rune of Death, though these attempts invariably ended in the Apostles' destruction. The most cunning apostles, as mentioned earlier, chose infiltration over confrontation. These individuals recognized that the Golden Order's strength lay partly in its pervasiveness, its ability to establish itself as the only legitimate source of spiritual authority. By mimicking the Order's forms while secretly maintaining their true faith, these infiltrators could move freely through society, gathering intelligence and waiting for opportunities to strike. Some became monks in Golden Order monasteries, their true nature hidden beneath layers of false piety. They learned the Order's prayers and rituals, performed them convincingly, all while secretly kindling small black flames in hidden chambers. Others posed as scholars, gaining access to libraries and archives where they could search for references to their lost queen and the techniques she had taught. A few even managed to secure positions as advisors to minor nobles, whispering counsel that subtly undermined the Golden Order's interests. These infiltrators represented a long-term threat, one that the Golden Order struggled to counter because it required constant vigilance and suspicion, qualities that eroded the trust necessary for stable governance. In the distant reaches of time, long after the Glomide Queen's defeat, two apostles of exceptional power and devotion would rise to prominence. These beings, known collectively as the Godskin Duo, represented the pinnacle of what the apostles could achieve even in their diminished state. One was an apostle in the traditional sense, tall and sinuous, wielding the black flame with precision and grace. The other was a noble, massive and implacable, its rolling attacks capable of crushing stone. Together, they formed a partnership that multiplied their individual strengths. The duo eventually made their way to crumbling Farum Azula, that impossible city suspended in a storm beyond time. Why they chose this location remains a matter of speculation. Some scholars suggest they were drawn by the ancient power that permeated the city, hoping it might help them restore the Black Flame. Others propose they were fleeing from a particularly determined Golden Order assault and found refuge in Farum Azula's temporal anomalies. Whatever their reasons, they established themselves in the city's depths, claiming a great chamber as their domain. They guarded the secrets contained within Farum Azula jealously, destroying any who ventured too deep into the ruins. Their presence there would have profound implications in ages yet to come, when tarnished warriors would seek the city's mysteries. The defeat of the gloam-eyed queen marked an undeniable turning point in the Godskin's fortunes. Where once they had been the dominant force in the lands between, hunters of gods who moved with impunity, they now became the hunted. Their numbers dwindled as the Golden Order's persecution continued across generations. Their black flame, though still dangerous, no longer inspired the existential terror it once had. Their influence waned, their temples fell to ruin, their rituals were forgotten by all but the most dedicated practitioners. By any objective measure, the Godskin Apostles' age had ended, their power broken, their goddess erased from history. Yet their ideology, the core beliefs that had animated their crusade, refused to die. The fundamental conviction that drove the Godskins, that gods should not be eternal, that even the divine must eventually face death, possessed a kind of truth that could not be suppressed through force alone. This idea persisted in the shadows, carried forward by the surviving apostles, and whispered in the dark corners where the Golden Order's light did not reach. It would continue to persist through all the ages of the Erd Tree's dominance, waiting for a time when the Golden Order's certainties would crack and the question of immortality would be raised once more. The Black Flame ritual, that most forbidden of practices, did not die with the gloam-eyed queen's defeat. Though Malekith had struck her down and sealed away destined death, the knowledge of how to kindle the god-slaying flames survived in the minds and hearts of the remaining Godskin cultists. These devotees, scattered and hunted, preserved the ritual in absolute secrecy, passing it down through generations, not through written word, which could be seized and burned, but through direct instruction from master to apprentice. The ritual itself required more than mere incantation. It demanded a spiritual alignment with the concept of mortality, an understanding that all things, even the divine, must eventually end. The black flame was not simply fire given a different hue, it was the physical manifestation of destined death's power, a flame that could reduce the immortal flesh of gods to ash and memory. To perform the ritual, an apostle had to first prepare their own body through the flaying and wearing of divine skin, creating a vessel capable of channeling such destructive force. Then, through prayer and meditation focused on the inevitability of death, they would draw forth the flame from within themselves, a process described in surviving fragments as feeling like one's soul was being turned inside out. The pain was said to be exquisite, transformative, a baptism in the very essence of ending. The Godslayer's greatsword, that legendary weapon which had once been wielded in the Queen's service, was hidden away in the aftermath of her fall. This was no ordinary blade. Forged specifically to channel the black flame, the greatsword bore a coiled serpent motif along its length, a design that spoke to the weapon's true nature. The serpent, in the cosmology of the lands between, represented cycles, shedding, and transformation. The sword's blade itself was dark, almost black, and when swung by one who understood its purpose, it would trail embers of that god slaying fire. After the queen's defeat, her most loyal followers spirited the weapon away, knowing that Marika's forces would seek to destroy or corrupt it. They concealed it in a place where the Golden Order's light did not reach, where the roots of the Erd tree had not yet penetrated. There it lay dormant, its true power sleeping but not extinguished, waiting for a time when hands worthy of wielding it might take it up once more. The Great Sword's hiding place became a pilgrimage site for the most devoted Godskins, though they dared not visit openly. They would come in the dead of night, offer prayers to their fallen queen, and renew their vows of vengeance before slipping back into the shadows. The Glomide Queen's original form and true name were lost to history, deliberately erased by the victorious Golden Order. Marika's chroniclers and priests worked tirelessly to expunge every record of the Queen's identity, to reduce her from a person with history and purpose to a nameless heretic, a cautionary tale about the dangers of defying the greater will. Yet even as her name was struck from every text and monument, speculation persisted among those who studied the fragments that remained. Some scholars, working in secret libraries far from Lindell, theorized that she had been an Empyrean, one of those rare beings chosen by the Two Fingers as a potential vessel for a god. This would explain her immense power, her ability to command destined death, and why Marika had viewed her as such an existential threat. Empyreans were not common. They appeared perhaps once in an age, individuals born with the capacity to ascend beyond mortality and become the centerpiece of a new order. If the Glomide Queen had indeed been an Empyrean, then her conflict with Marika took on even greater significance. It was not merely a battle between a goddess and a challenger, but a cosmic struggle between two potential futures for the lands between two fundamentally incompatible visions of what the world should be. Her eyes, those distinctive features that gave her the title Gloam-eyed, were said to be the color of twilight itself, that liminal time between day and night when the world exists in neither full light nor complete darkness. Gloam, an old word for dusk, captured perfectly the queen's nature as a figure who stood between life and death, who wielded the power to end immortality. Those who claimed to have seen her before her fall, in the fragmentary accounts that survived, described eyes that shifted in color, sometimes appearing violet, sometimes a deep amber, sometimes nearly black, as though they contained the entire spectrum of a setting sun. These eyes became the most enduring symbol of her lost divinity, the one feature that could not be completely erased from memory. The Godskin apostles, in their secret gatherings, would meditate on the concept of the gloam, seeking to understand their queen's perspective, to see the world as she had seen it. They believed that in that twilight vision lay the key to understanding why gods must die, why immortality was not a blessing but a curse that stagnated the world and prevented necessary change. The Godskin Apostles' scripture, collected in what was known as the Godskin Prayer Book, was systematically banned and destroyed by the Golden Order in the years following the Queen's defeat. This prayer book contained not only the incantations for summoning the Black Flame, but also the philosophical and theological foundations of the Godskin faith. It explained why the flaying of gods was not merely an act of violence, but a sacred duty, a necessary correction to the unnatural state of immortal beings ruling over mortal realms. The prayer book detailed the rituals for preparing divine skin, for wearing it as a second flesh, for channeling the power of those who had been flayed. It contained prayers to the Glomide Queen herself, invocations that called upon her even in defeat to guide her followers toward their ultimate goal. The Golden Order recognized the prayer book as perhaps the most dangerous artifact of the Godskin cult, more threatening even than their weapons, because ideas could spread farther and faster than any blade could reach. Marika's inquisitors, working with ruthless efficiency, tracked down every known copy of the prayer book. They raided hidden libraries, tortured captured apostles for information about where copies might be concealed, and burned entire collections of texts if even a single page of Godskin scripture was found among them. Yet, as with all attempts at total censorship, the effort was not entirely successful. Fragments survived, hidden in places too remote or too well protected for the inquisitors to reach. Individual prayers were memorized and passed down orally. The core teachings, stripped of their elaborate theological framework, persisted in simplified form. Apostles who resisted this persecution, who refused to renounce their faith or surrender their sacred texts, were hunted down with extreme prejudice by Malekith and the forces of the Golden Order. Malekith, having already defeated the gloam-eyed queen herself, took a personal interest in eradicating her followers. He viewed them not merely as heretics, but as a continuing threat to the stability of Marika's reign. Each apostle he hunted was a potential spark that might reignite the flames of rebellion. The Black Blade pursued them across the lands between, from the frozen peaks of the mountaintops to the fetid swamps of the southern regions. He learned their hiding places, their patterns of movement, their methods of communication. Malekith was patient, methodical, willing to wait months or even years to confirm the location of a single high-ranking apostle before striking. When he did attack, he showed no mercy. The apostles, for their part, did not go quietly. Many chose to make their final stands in dramatic fashion, using their deaths as statements of faith. They would gather in sacred sites, don their finest robes of divine skin, and await Malekith's arrival. When he came, they would unleash every technique they possessed, filling the air with black flame, transforming their bodies into whirling instruments of death. They knew they could not win, but they fought to prove that the Godskin faith could not be intimidated, that even facing certain death, they would not recant. These battles became legendary among the surviving cultists, tales of martyrdom that inspired future generations to maintain their resistance. The Queen's legacy was further obscured by the rise of the Golden Order's dogma, which systematically labeled her a heretic and rewrote the history of her era to serve Marika's narrative. In the official histories promulgated by the Golden Order's scholars and priests, the gloam-eyed queen was portrayed not as a rival deity with her own legitimate claim to power, but as a mad usurper, a wielder of forbidden powers who had threatened the natural order of things. The Golden Order's doctrine taught that Marika's ascension and the establishment of the Erd Tree represented the culmination of history, the final and perfect form of governance for the lands between. Any who had opposed this were, by definition, enemies of progress and civilization. The gloam-eyed queen was cast as the ultimate example of such opposition, a cautionary tale about the dangers of seeking power through unnatural means. Her use of destined death was characterized not as a fundamental aspect of existence, but as a perversion, a theft of something that should have remained sealed away. The Golden Order's theologians developed elaborate arguments about why immortality for the gods was necessary and good, why the natural cycle of death should apply only to mortals and lesser beings. They taught that Marika's removal of destined death from the world had been an act of mercy, sparing the people of the lands between from the terror of true oblivion. In this revised history, Malekith's defeat of the gloam-eyed queen was not a power struggle between rival factions, but a heroic act of defense, the preservation of order against chaos. Despite this overwhelming propaganda, whispers of the queen's return persisted among the Godskins, who believed fervently in a coming age of the Duskborn. This prophecy, passed down through the generations of scattered cultists, held that the gloam-eyed queen's defeat was not permanent, that she would one day return to reclaim her power and finish what she had started. The age of the Duskborn, as they envisioned it, would be a time when the false immortality of the gods would be stripped away, when destined death would be unleashed once more upon the world, when the natural order of birth, life, death, and in rebirth would be restored. The Godskins interpreted various signs and portents as evidence that this age was approaching. They saw significance in the gradual corruption of the Golden Order, in the internal conflicts that began to plague Marika's family, in the strange phenomena that appeared in the wake of the shattering. Each setback for the Golden Order was viewed as a step toward their queen's return. The prophecy gave the scattered and persecuted Godskins a sense of purpose, a reason to endure. It transformed their suffering from meaningless persecution into a necessary trial, a period of testing before their ultimate vindication. Young apostles were raised on stories of the coming age, taught to prepare themselves for the day when they would no longer need to hide, when they could openly practice their faith and complete the great work their queen had begun. The Godskin swaddling cloth, a relic of their flaying rituals, was said to contain traces of the queen's power, a physical connection to her divine essence. This cloth, stained with the blood of countless gods and demigods who had been flayed over the centuries, was more than a simple tool. It had absorbed something of the victim's power, becoming a repository of divine energy. The Godskins believed that the cloth had been present at the queen's own rituals, that she herself had used it in her work, and that her touch had imbued it with a fragment of her authority over death. The swaddling cloth was used in the initiation of new apostles, wrapped around them as they underwent their first flaying, serving as a spiritual conduit between the novice and the long line of Godskin practitioners stretching back to the queen herself. Those who wore the cloth during battle reported feeling a surge of vitality with each enemy they struck down, as though the cloth was feeding them the life force of their victims. This was not mere superstition. The cloth demonstrably enhanced the wearer's resilience and stamina, allowing them to fight longer and recover faster from wounds. Some theorized that the cloth worked by temporarily granting the wearer a portion of the immortality that had been stripped from the flayed gods, a poetic reversal that the Godskins found deeply satisfying. The cloth was carefully preserved and passed down through the generations, never allowed to be washed, for fear that cleaning it would remove the accumulated power it contained. The Black Flame monks, who would emerge later as heretics within the Golden Order's own ranks, may have had ties to the Godskin apostles' surviving doctrines. These monks, originally part of the Fire Monks, who tended the Flame of Ruin, somehow gained access to knowledge of the Black Flame and began to practice techniques remarkably similar to those of the Godskins. The exact nature of this connection remained unclear, deliberately obscured by both groups for their own protection. Some scholars speculated that a Godskin apostle, perhaps seeking to spread their teachings more widely, had infiltrated the Fire Monks and begun teaching select individuals in secret. Others believed that the Fire Monks, through their own study of flame and their growing disillusionment with the Golden Order, had independently rediscovered principles similar to those the Godskins had practiced. The Black Flame monks did not flay gods or wear their skin, but they did master the art of channeling the god-slaying flame, and their prayers bore suspicious similarities to fragments of the banned Godskin prayer book. They spoke of fire as a purifying force, as something that could reduce even the divine to ash, language that echoed Godskin theology. The Golden Order, recognizing the threat, branded these monks as heretics and attempted to suppress them, but the damage was done. The Black Flame had found new adherents, and the Godskins' core teachings had survived in yet another form. The Queen's defeat had ensured Marika's dominance, cementing the Golden Order's control over the lands between for an age, but the seeds of the Godskins' rebellion remained, buried but viable, waiting for the right conditions to sprout once more. Marika had won the immediate conflict, had seized control of destined death, and established her reign, but she had not and could not completely eradicate the ideas that the gloam-eyed queen represented. The concept that gods should not be immortal, that their endless rule stagnated the world, that death was a necessary part of existence rather than something to be feared and avoided, these ideas had a logic and appeal that could not be destroyed by force alone. As long as mortals suffered under the rule of distant, unchanging gods, as long as the Golden Order's promises of a perfect world failed to materialize, there would be those who looked to alternative visions, who wondered if perhaps the Glomide Queen had been right after all. The Godskins understood this. They knew that their faith was not dependent on military victory or political power. It was a long game they played, measured in centuries rather than years, and they were patient. In the shadows, far from the light of the Erd Tree and the watchful eyes of the Golden Order, the Godskins continued to await a time when the black flame could once again slay gods. They maintained their practices, trained new apostles, preserved their knowledge and their artifacts. They established hidden sanctuaries in the most remote and inhospitable regions of the lands between, places where even Malekith's reach was limited. They developed codes and signals for identifying fellow believers, ways of recognizing each other without openly declaring their allegiance. They infiltrated other organizations, planted sleeper agents within the Golden Order's own institutions, gathering intelligence and waiting for opportunities. The Godskins became masters of patience and subterfuge, understanding that open confrontation had failed their queen and would fail them as well. Instead, they worked slowly, incrementally, to undermine the Golden Order from within, to spread doubt about its teachings, to preserve alternatives that might one day flourish when the Golden Order inevitably faltered. The era of the Glomide Queen faded into myth, remembered only in fragments by those who defied the Golden Order, but those fragments proved remarkably resilient. In taverns, far from Landell, travelers would sometimes hear old songs that contained verses about a twilight goddess who had challenged the heavens. In forbidden libraries, scholars would discover margin notes in ancient texts that referenced a power older than the Erd Tree. In the nightmares of Golden Order priests, visions of gloam-colored eyes would appear, watching, judging, waiting. The queen herself was gone, her name forgotten, her form unknown, but her shadow stretched long across the ages, a reminder that Marika's victory had not been as complete or as final as the Golden Order claimed. And in that shadow, the Godskins endured, keeping alive the memory of a time when gods could die, and the hope of a future when they would die again. The age of the gloam-eyed queen would not endure. As we move into the early Erd Tree era, a period known as the Erd Tree Ascendancy, the religious and political landscape of the lands between underwent a transformation so complete that it would reshape the very nature of life and death itself. This was the epoch when the Erd Tree, a colossal golden tree of divine origin, emerged not merely as a landmark, but as the dominant symbol of divinity across the entire realm, supplanting all previous religious orders and establishing a new cosmic hierarchy that would define the age to come. The Erd Tree's rise was not a gradual cultural shift, but a deliberate act of divine conquest. Where once multiple faiths and powers had coexisted in uneasy balance, the Erd Tree now stood as the singular beacon of legitimacy, its golden light spreading across the lands between like a proclamation of absolute truth. The tree itself was more than symbolic. It was a physical manifestation of the greater will's presence in the world, a conduit through which divine grace flowed to those deemed worthy. Its roots burrowed deep into the earth, drawing sustenance from the very essence of the land, while its branches reached toward the heavens, bridging the mortal realm with the cosmic order that governed all existence. The Erd Tree's golden leaves, which never fell except in times of great upheaval, became a currency of blessing, and to stand in its light was to stand in the favor of the divine. At the center of this transformation stood Queen Marika the Eternal, a figure whose origins remain shrouded in mystery, but whose impact on the lands between cannot be overstated. Marika was not simply a monarch in the traditional sense. She was a vessel of divine will, chosen by the greater will itself to serve as both ruler and god. With the backing of this cosmic entity, Marika established what would become known as the Golden Order, a comprehensive system of laws, beliefs, and metaphysical principles that centered all worship, all loyalty, and all understanding of the world around the Erd Tree and its divine mandate. The Golden Order was not merely a religion, it was a restructuring of reality itself, a codification of how the world should function, how death should operate, and how power should flow through the hierarchy of existence. The legitimacy of Marika's rule and the Erd Tree's ascendancy was reinforced by the endorsement of the Two Fingers, enigmatic entities that served as emissaries of the greater will. These ancient beings, which appear as massive gnarled fingers emerging from stone pedestals, possess the ability to commune directly with the outer god that governed the cosmos. Their blessing of Marika was not a political convenience, but a cosmic validation. The fingers declared that Marika was the chosen vessel, that the Erd Tree was the true path, and that all who opposed this new order stood against the will of the universe itself. This divine endorsement gave Marika's conquest an air of inevitability, transforming what might have been seen as a power grab into a sacred mission to bring the lands between into alignment with cosmic law. But the establishment of the Golden Order could not proceed unopposed. The gloam-eyed queen, whose dominion over death through the black flame had made her a formidable power in the previous age, represented everything the new order sought to eliminate. Her philosophy, her power, and her very existence contradicted the fundamental principles Marika sought to establish. Where the Golden Order promised eternal life through grace and the blessing of the Erd Tree, the gloam-eyed queen wielded a flame that could end even gods. Where Marika sought to control death itself, the Godskin apostles who served the gloam-eyed queen celebrated death as the ultimate equalizer, the one force that could humble even the divine. The conflict between these two powers was inevitable, and it came to a head in a confrontation that would determine the fate of the lands between for ages to come. Marika did not face the gloam-eyed queen alone. She was accompanied by Malekith, a shadowy figure who would become known throughout history as the Black Blade. Malekith was more than a warrior. He was Marika's shadow, bound to her by ties that transcended mere loyalty. Some texts suggest he was a half-brother, others that he was a creation of divine will, but all agree on his absolute devotion to Marika and his terrible prowess in battle. The confrontation between Malekith and the gloam-eyed queen was not simply a duel between champions, but a clash of metaphysical principles, a battle to determine which understanding of death would prevail in the new age. Malekith emerged victorious, and in his triumph, the gloam-eyed queen was deposed. The exact nature of her defeat remains unclear. Some accounts suggest she was slain, while others indicate she was sealed away, her power bound and her influence shattered. What is certain is that her defeat marked the end of an era and the beginning of a systematic suppression of everything she represented. But Malekith's victory went beyond merely defeating a rival power. In the aftermath of the battle, he performed an act that would reshape the fundamental nature of existence in the lands between. He sealed away the rune of death itself. The rune of death, also known as destined death, was one of the fundamental aspects of the Elden Ring, the cosmic order that governed reality. It was the principle that made true death possible, the force that ensured even gods and immortals could be permanently ended. By sealing this rune, Malekith removed true death from the world. This was not an act of preservation, but of control. With destined death sealed away, Marika and the Golden Order gained absolute dominion over life and death. No longer could beings die permanently unless the Golden Order willed it. The cycle of life became bound to the Erd Tree, with souls returning to its roots upon death, only to be reborn again in an eternal cycle of grace. The sealing of the Rune of Death had profound consequences for the Godskin Apostles and their sacred black flame. This flame, which had once burned with the power of destined death itself, was suddenly and dramatically weakened. The black flame had derived its god-slaying properties from its connection to true death, from its ability to inflict wounds that could not be healed, to end existences that were meant to be eternal. With the rune of death sealed away, the black flame became a shadow of its former self. It could still burn, still inflict terrible wounds, but it could no longer fulfill its ultimate purpose. The Godskins found themselves wielding a weapon that had been fundamentally neutered, their most sacred right stripped of its cosmic significance. The Golden Order did not stop at merely weakening the Godskins' power. Queen Marika and her followers branded the Godskin Apostles as heretics, enemies of the Divine Order, practitioners of forbidden arts that stood in opposition to the Erd Tree's eternal grace. This was not merely a political designation, but a cosmic condemnation. To be named a heretic by the Golden Order was to be cast out from grace itself, to be marked as an enemy of the fundamental structure of reality. The apostles, who had once operated openly, conducting their rituals and hunting their prey without fear, now found themselves hunted in turn. The forces of the Golden Order, armed with the certainty of divine mandate and the power of the Erd Tree's grace, drove the Godskins from their temples, their strongholds, and their sacred places. The suppression of the Black Flame became a priority for the Golden Order. Marika's forces sought not only to defeat the Godskins, but to erase the very knowledge of what their flame had once been capable of. The Golden Order's influence, which now permeated every aspect of life in the lands between, worked to diminish the Black Flame's power. Where once it had burned with the cold finality of death itself, it now became merely another form of fire, dangerous certainly, but no longer the cosmic threat it had represented. This suppression was both physical and metaphysical, a rewriting of the laws that governed the flame's nature. Faced with annihilation, the Godskin Apostles and their noble counterparts made the only choice available to them. They retreated, abandoning their open temples and withdrawing to hidden locations where the Golden Order's reach was limited or where ancient protections still held some power. The Divine Towers, those mysterious structures that pierce the sky at various points across the lands between, became refuges for some. These towers, built in an age before the Erd Tree, possessed their own inherent power, their own connection to cosmic forces that predated Marika's order. Within their walls, the Godskins found temporary sanctuary, places where they could continue their practices away from the eyes of the Golden Order's inquisitors. Others fled to subterranean ruins, descending into the depths beneath the lands between where ancient civilizations had once flourished. These underground realms, forgotten by most and avoided by many, offered darkness and isolation. In places like the Kaled catacombs and the depths beneath Landel, the Godskins established hidden sanctuaries. Here, in the darkness, they could continue their rituals, continue their sacred practice of flaying the skin of powerful beings, even as the world above them transformed into something unrecognizable. The Godskin nobles, the elite members of the sect who had achieved a higher state of understanding and power, took on a particularly crucial role in this new age of hiding. These nobles, distinguished by their corpulent forms and their mastery of the Black Flame, became the keepers of the old ways. They operated in absolute secrecy, moving between the hidden strongholds, ensuring that the knowledge and practices of the Godskin faith would not be lost entirely. The nobles understood that they were no longer hunters, operating from a position of strength, but survivors clinging to a fading tradition. Their rituals became more secretive, their movements more careful, their very existence a defiance of the new cosmic order. Among the most remarkable of the Godskin's hidden strongholds was the Windmill Village, perched high on the Altus Plateau. This remote settlement, seemingly innocuous to casual observers, became a center of Godskin activity. The village's isolation and its strange customs, the dancing women who moved in eternal celebration, served as both camouflage and ritual. Here, far from the major centers of Golden Order power, the Godskins could operate with relative freedom. The village became a place where the faithful could gather, where the old rites could be performed, and where the skinning of victims could continue in service to beliefs that the rest of the world had condemned as heretical. Despite the suppression, despite the loss of their god-slaying power, the Godskin apostles never abandoned their most sacred practice. They continued to hunt, to capture, and to flay the skin of demigods and other powerful beings. This practice, which had always been central to their faith, took on new meaning in the age of hiding. Each skin they collected became an act of defiance, a statement that the old ways had not been entirely extinguished. The robes they wore, stitched together from the flesh of the mighty, served as both armor and testament, physical proof that even in an age dominated by the Erd Tree's golden light, the Godskins remained patient and persistent, waiting for an opportunity that might never come. With the Erd Tree's golden light now casting long shadows across the lands between, the Godskins, ever resourceful, found an unlikely yet powerful ally. Rykard, the ambitious and increasingly blasphemous Lord of Volcano Manor, saw in the Godskins a potent weapon against the Golden Order he so despised. He secretly offered them sanctuary within the volcanic depths of his domain, a place where the Erd Tree's influence struggled to penetrate. This alliance was not born of shared ideology, but rather of mutual utility. Rykard sought to undermine the Erd Tree by any means necessary, and the Godskins, with their ancient power and deep-seated animosity towards the Golden Order, were perfect instruments. Within Volcano Manor, the Godskins could regroup, strategize, and continue their forbidden practices under the protective gaze of a demigod. This period marked a significant, albeit temporary, resurgence for the beleaguered apostles, providing them with a secure base from which to launch their clandestine operations. From the shadows of Volcano Manor, the Godskins began a subtle yet insidious infiltration of the Golden Order itself. Posing as devout monks or erudite scholars, they wormed their way into institutions and communities across the lands between. Their mastery of disguise and their ability to mimic the piety of the Golden Order allowed them to gather intelligence, sow discord, and even subtly influence the very teachings they outwardly embraced. Imagine a Godskin apostle, cloaked in the robes of a Golden Order cleric, meticulously transcribing sacred texts while secretly imbuing them with subtle blasphemies, or whispering doubts into the ears of impressionable acolytes. These infiltrators were not merely spies, but active agents of corruption, chipping away at the foundations of the Golden Order from within. Their presence was a constant, unseen threat, a festering wound in the heart of the dominant faith. They sought to understand the weaknesses of their enemy, to identify potential converts, and to lay the groundwork for future acts of defiance. Their patience was immense, their dedication unwavering, and their methods utterly ruthless. Beneath the veneer of their newfound respectability, the Black Flame ritual, the very core of their faith, continued to be practiced in secret. These forbidden ceremonies, invoking the destructive power of the Black Flame, were often conducted in the forgotten depths of catacombs, where the dead lay undisturbed, or in the crumbling ruins of abandoned churches, far from the prying eyes of the Golden Order's zealous adherents. Imagine the flickering light of a single torch illuminating the grotesque forms of Godskin apostles, their skins stretched taut and pale as they chant ancient incantations, their voices echoing through the subterranean darkness. The air would be thick with the scent of incense and the metallic tang of blood as sacrifices, often unwitting, were offered to fuel the black flame. These rituals were not merely acts of worship, they were acts of defiance, a desperate clinging to their ancestral power in a world increasingly dominated by the Erd Tree. Each ritual was a silent promise of vengeance, a reaffirmation of their commitment to the Glomide Queen and her forgotten reign. The secrecy surrounding these rites only intensified their potency, transforming them into acts of profound rebellion. During this tumultuous period, a notorious pair of Godskin apostles, known simply as the Godskin Duo, emerged as a significant threat. These two, one a lithe and agile noble, the other a hulking and brutal apostle, became active throughout the lands between, their coordinated attacks and terrifying efficiency making them legendary figures of dread. They were masters of evasion, always seeming to slip through the fingers of the Golden Order's forces, leaving a trail of destruction and fear in their wake. Their appearances were often sudden and devastating, striking at key Golden Order outposts or ambushing unsuspecting patrols. The duo represented the pinnacle of Godskin combat prowess, a testament to their enduring strength even in decline. Their very existence was a propaganda victory for the Godskins, a symbol of their continued defiance, and a constant source of frustration for the Golden Order, who poured considerable resources into their capture, always in vain. Their legend grew with each successful escape, inspiring fear in their enemies and a grim hope in their dwindling followers. As the Erdtree's influence solidified, the magnificent divine towers, once sacred sites of Godskin worship and monuments to the outer gods, were systematically repurposed by the Golden Order. These towering structures, imbued with ancient power, were stripped of their original symbolism and rededicated to Erdtree rituals. Imagine the elaborate frescoes depicting the Glomide Queen being plastered over with golden leaf, the altars once stained with the blood of giants, now adorned with symbols of the Erdtree, and the chants of the Black Flame replaced by hymns to Marika. This act of desecration was a deliberate attempt to erase the memory of the Godskins and their faith, to subsume their power into the burgeoning dominance of the Golden Order. Yet despite the outward transformation, the ancient energies of the towers still hummed beneath the surface, a subtle reminder of what once was. The Godskins, of course, viewed this repurposing as a profound insult, a further justification for their unwavering hatred of the Golden Order. They saw it as a theft of their heritage, a deliberate act of cultural annihilation. Despite the relentless persecution and the systematic erasure of their past, the Godskins clung fiercely to their heritage. They painstakingly preserved fragments of the Glomide Queen's teachings, safeguarding scrolls, incantations, and fragmented prophecies, hoping for her eventual return. Those precious relics were hidden in the deepest recesses of their secret strongholds, in forgotten crypts, and even within the very structures now occupied by the Golden Order. Each scrap of parchment, each whispered verse, was a lifeline to their past, a promise of a future where the Black Flame would once again reign supreme. They believed that the Queen was not truly gone, but merely slumbering, awaiting the opportune moment to reassert her dominion. Their faith in her return was an unshakable pillar of their identity, fueling their resistance and providing a beacon of hope in their darkest hours. These preserved teachings were not just historical documents, they were sacred texts imbued with the power of their forgotten deity, ready to be unleashed when the time was right. From within the ranks of the beleaguered Godskins, a splinter group emerged, known as the Black Flame Monks. These dedicated individuals, more zealous and perhaps more pragmatic than their brethren, took on the crucial role of protecting the Godskin's remaining influence. They were the guardians of the hidden rituals, the protectors of the sacred texts, and the enforcers of the Godskin Creed. Unlike the infiltrators, who sought to blend in, the Black Flame monks were often more overt in their defiance. Their distinctive black and gold robes, a stark contrast to the golden hues of the Erd Tree's followers. They were a fighting force, a dedicated cadre of warriors and sorcerers who would fiercely defend any remaining bastion of Godskin power. Their emergence signified a hardening of the Godskin resistance, a shift from subtle infiltration to more direct, albeit still clandestine, protection of their core beliefs and practices. They were the last line of defense, the unwavering shield against the encroaching golden tide. In their desperate struggle for survival, the Godskins began to actively target Tarnished and other outcasts of the lands between, seeking to recruit them to their cause. They understood that those rejected by the Golden Order, those who harbored resentment and a thirst for power, would be fertile ground for their blasphemous ideology. They offered these disenfranchised individuals a sense of belonging, a promise of power through the black flame, and a chance for vengeance against the system that had cast them aside. Imagine a weary Tarnished, shunned and reviled, being approached by a cloaked Godskin apostle, whispering promises of forgotten might and a path to true strength, a strength that defied the Erd Tree. This recruitment drive was a pragmatic necessity, a way to bolster their dwindling numbers and inject new blood into their ancient order. The Godskins understood the power of desperation, and they expertly exploited the grievances of those who had nothing left to lose, offering them a new purpose, however dark. The Golden Order, increasingly aware of the persistent threat posed by the Godskins, intensified its persecution. What began as sporadic hunts evolved into a systematic and relentless campaign, with the Golden Order's forces, bolstered by their demigod champions, hunting the Godskins across the entire breadth of the lands between. No longer content with merely containing them, the Golden Order sought their complete eradication. Imagine the vast armies of the Golden Order, led by zealous knights and powerful sorcerers, sweeping through ancient ruins and hidden caves, rooting out any suspected Godskin presence. The pressure on the Godskins became immense, forcing them further into hiding, pushing them to the very brink of extinction. This intensified persecution marked a turning point, transforming the Godskins from a persistent nuisance into a hunted, endangered species, their very existence threatened by the overwhelming might of the dominant power. Under this relentless assault, the Godskins' influence undeniably waned. Their overt presence diminished significantly, and their open acts of defiance became rare. However, their rituals, the very heart of their faith, stubbornly persisted. They were driven deeper underground, into the most remote and forgotten corners of the lands between. The Kylid Divine Tower, for instance, despite its outward repurposing by the Golden Order, became a clandestine sanctuary for these forbidden practices. Within its shadowed depths, far from the golden light of the Erd Tree, the black flame still flickered, its power nurtured in secret. These hidden locations became vital lifelines, ensuring the continuation of their traditions and the preservation of their identity. The waning influence did not signify defeat, but rather a strategic retreat, a desperate clinging to the embers of their power in the hope of a future resurgence. As the Erd Tree's dominance grew ever stronger, its golden light permeating every corner of the lands between, the power of the black flame was further diminished. The very essence of the world seemed to shift, favoring the Erd Tree's life-giving energy over the destructive force of the black flame. This was not merely a matter of military might, but a fundamental alteration of the spiritual landscape. The black flame, once a force capable of slaying gods, found its efficacy dulled, its destructive potential hampered by the pervasive influence of the Erd Tree. It became harder to wield, less potent in its effects, a shadow of its former glory. This gradual weakening was a direct consequence of the Erd tree's ascendancy, a testament to its overwhelming spiritual and physical power. The Godskins, in turn, felt this diminishing power keenly, their faith tested as their most potent weapon seemed to lose its edge against the ever brightening glow of the Erd tree. As the Golden Order solidified its grip on the lands between, the beleaguered Godskins, facing overwhelming opposition, began to experiment with grafting and other forbidden arts in a desperate bid to regain their strength. This wasn't merely about physical augmentation, it was a profound theological crisis. Their black flame, once a symbol of divine judgment and the very antithesis of the Erd tree's golden grace, was faltering. The Godskins believed that by integrating the flesh of their enemies, or even their own fallen, they could absorb their vitality, their essence, and perhaps reignite the dwindling embers of their power. This practice, horrifying to the Golden Order, was a grotesque mirroring of the Erd tree's own life-giving properties, a dark parody of its growth and renewal. They were, in a sense, trying to become the very thing they sought to destroy, but through a perverted lens. The theological implications were immense. If the greater will's power flowed through the Erd tree, could the Godskins, by consuming and integrating, hijack a portion of that power, or at least create a counterforce capable of challenging it? This wasn't just about survival, it was about reclaiming their divine mandate, a desperate gamble to prove the supremacy of the gloam-eyed queen's vision over Marika's. Meanwhile, the legacy of the gloam-eyed queen, though her physical presence was long gone, was meticulously kept alive through secret texts and oral traditions among the apostles. These were not mere historical records, they were sacred scriptures, prophecies, and rituals passed down in hushed tones, often encoded or disguised to evade the Golden Order's zealous purges. These texts detailed the Queen's divine authority, her connection to the destined death, and the true purpose of the Black Flame, not merely destruction, but a necessary cleansing, a fundamental aspect of the natural cycle that the Erd tree had disrupted. The apostles, particularly the higher-ranking ones, became the custodians of this esoteric knowledge, their minds' vast libraries of forbidden lore. They understood that the physical manifestations of their power might be waning, but the ideological battle, the war for the very soul of the lands between, was far from over. Their faith in the Queen, even in her absence, was absolute, a defiant beacon in the encroaching golden darkness. This preservation of their spiritual heritage was crucial, for it provided the theological bedrock for their continued resistance, a source of unwavering conviction, even as their material power waned. The Golden Order's relentless campaign soon led to the complete eradication of the Godskins' overt presence in Landel, the royal capital. Once, they had been a formidable force within its walls, perhaps even challenging the early Erd tree's nascent dominion. But now, their temples were razed, their symbols defaced, and any known adherents ruthlessly hunted down. This forced them to operate solely in the shadows, becoming a subterranean current of dissent and violence. Their movements were clandestine, their communications encrypted, their gatherings held in forgotten catacombs or deep within the earth, far from the watchful eyes of the Golden Order's sentinels and the pervasive glow of the Erd tree. This shift from overt power to covert insurgency fundamentally altered their tactics. No longer could they openly challenge the Golden Order. Instead, they became masters of infiltration, sabotage, and sudden brutal strikes against isolated targets. Their goal was no longer conquest, but survival and the slow, insidious undermining of the Erd tree's authority. The Golden Order's crusade against the Godskins was not merely a defensive measure. It was an active, aggressive campaign of annihilation, leading to the destruction of many of their ancient temples. These were not just places of worship, They were bastions of their power, repositories of their knowledge, and training grounds for their apostles and nobles. Each fallen temple represented a significant blow, a loss of both spiritual and strategic assets. Imagine, for instance, the burning of a grand temple dedicated to the Glomide Queen, its black flames extinguished by holy fire, its sacred artifacts shattered, its very foundations consecrated by the Golden Order to erase any lingering trace of their heresy. These acts of destruction were meant to be symbolic, a clear message that the Golden Order would tolerate no rivals, no alternative faiths. But for the Godskins, each destroyed temple fueled their hatred and solidified their resolve, transforming their fight from one of dominance to one of righteous vengeance. The memory of these losses became a powerful motivator, a constant reminder of the atrocities committed against their faith. As their numbers dwindled and their power waned, the Godskins' remaining followers became increasingly fanatical, resorting to extreme measures. Faced with existential threat, their faith, once a structured doctrine, morphed into a desperate, almost suicidal devotion. They embraced self-mutilation, ritualistic sacrifices of their own kind, and even more aggressive forms of grafting, not just for power, but as a testament to their unwavering loyalty to the Glomide Queen. This fanaticism manifested in their combat style, making them terrifyingly relentless, seemingly impervious to pain, and utterly fearless in the face of death. They were no longer fighting for victory in the traditional sense, but for the preservation of their faith, for the honor of their queen, and for the ultimate fulfillment of the destined death. Their methods became more brutal, their targets less discriminate as their desperation grew. This was the dark side of absolute conviction, a descent into zealotry born of profound loss and persecution. In response to the relentless pressure, the Black Flame monks, a specialized sect within the Godskin hierarchy, established hidden enclaves, particularly in remote and inhospitable regions such as the mountaintops of the Giants. These were not mere hideouts. They were fortified monasteries designed to be self-sufficient and defensible against the Golden Order's incursions. The choice of the mountaintops was strategic. Its extreme climate, treacherous terrain, and general inaccessibility made it a natural fortress. Here, amidst the snow and ice, the monks could practice their rituals, train new recruits, and preserve their knowledge far from the prying eyes of the Erd Tree's faithful. These enclaves became vital centers for the continuation of their faith, isolated pockets where the black flame could still flicker, albeit dimly. They were places of austere devotion, where the monks endured harsh conditions, their discipline honed by adversity, their commitment to the Glomide Queen unwavering. The isolation also fostered a deeper, more introspective form of their faith, focusing on the internal cultivation of the Black Flame's power rather than overt displays of force. Consequently, the Godskins' rituals, once grand and public displays of their power, became more sporadic, conducted only in the most secure locations. No longer could they openly perform the skinning rites or communal invocations of the Black Flame. Instead, these sacred acts were relegated to the deepest catacombs, the most remote caves, or within the heavily guarded walls of their hidden enclaves. Each ritual became a clandestine operation, meticulously planned and executed with the utmost secrecy, often under the cloak of darkness. The danger of discovery was ever present, and any misstep could lead to swift and brutal reprisal from the Golden Order. This scarcity of ritual, however, did not diminish its significance. If anything, it intensified it. Each performance of the Black Flame ritual became a defiant act, a powerful affirmation of their faith in the face of overwhelming persecution, a desperate plea to their absent queen for guidance and strength. The rarity of these events imbued them with a profound, almost desperate spiritual weight. Despite the Godskins' continued existence, the Erdtree's growing radiance effectively obscured their influence, making them appear as little more than a fading memory to the majority of the lands between. The golden light of the Erdtree both literal and metaphorical, was pervasive, a constant reminder of the Golden Order's triumph and the Greater Will's dominion. Against this overwhelming luminescence, the dim, flickering embers of the black flame seemed insignificant. The common folk bathed in the Erdtree's grace were largely unaware of the Godskin's continued struggle, or dismissed them as ancient, vanquished foes. Yet beneath this veneer of peace and prosperity, the Godskin's threat remained. It was a subterranean fire, smoldering, waiting for an opportunity to erupt. Their influence, though hidden, was still felt in the fear they inspired, in the whispers of their atrocities, and in the lingering unease that permeated the lands that had once suffered under their dominion. The Erd Tree might have obscured them, but it had not eradicated them. The Godskin's last major stronghold, the Divine Tower of Liurnia, eventually fell to the relentless assault of the Golden Order. This was a catastrophic blow, a symbolic and strategic defeat that marked the near-total collapse of their organized resistance. The Divine Towers, immense structures imbued with arcane power, were not merely fortresses. They were conduits to the outer gods, places of immense spiritual significance. The fall of Liurnia's tower meant the Golden Order had effectively severed another vital connection for the Godskins, further isolating them from the source of their power. The battle for this tower would have been a brutal, drawn-out affair, a testament to the Godskins' desperate defense and the Golden Order's unwavering resolve. The ultimate victory of the Golden Order here cemented their control over a crucial region and further marginalized the Godskins, pushing them to the very brink of extinction. The loss of such a significant bastion would have had profound psychological effects on the remaining Godskins, deepening their sense of despair and isolation. Following these devastating losses, the Godskin apostles, once feared and revered figures, became a whispered legend, feared but rarely seen. Their physical presence became scarce, their movements restricted to the deepest shadows and the most desolate corners of the lands between. They were specters, ghosts of a bygone era, their names invoked in hushed tones by those who remembered their reign of terror. Children were warned of the skin stealers, and travelers avoided forgotten paths where an apostle might still lurk. This transformation from overt antagonists to mythical boogeymen was a testament to the Golden Order's success in suppressing them. Yet, the very act of whispering their names, of fearing their unseen presence, kept their legend alive, a testament to the enduring power of their terrifying image. They became a symbol of the darkness that the Erd Tree sought to suppress, a constant reminder of the fragility of peace. Ultimately, the Black Flame's suppression by the Golden Order marked the near extinction of the Godskins' power. The sacred fire, once a roaring inferno, was reduced to a few flickering embers, guarded by a desperate few. The Golden Order, through its relentless crusades, its systematic destruction of temples, and its eradication of Godskin strongholds, had achieved its objective, to neutralize the greatest threat to the Erd Tree's dominion. The age of the Black Flame had ended, replaced by the Golden Age of the Erd Tree. The Godskins, once rulers of the lands between, were now scattered remnants, their power shattered, their faith driven underground. This was not a total annihilation, but a profound subjugation, a forced retreat into the deepest recesses of the world, where they would bide their time, their hatred simmering, waiting for an opportunity to once again unleash the destined death upon the lands between. The Golden Order had won the war, but the embers of the Black Flame, though faint, were not entirely extinguished. Transition from previous segment, perhaps a fading image of the Erd Tree in its early glory, then a subtle shift to a more shadowed, unsettling visual. And so, we arrive at the Mid-Erd Tree era, a period often romanticized as the Golden Order's zenith, yet one where shadows stretch long and deep. While the Erd Tree's golden light bathed the lands between, a far older, darker flame was being rekindled. This is the era we call the Godskin apostasy, a time of resurgence for a faith thought utterly vanquished. You see, the gloam-eyed queen, the enigmatic figure who once wielded the god-slaying black flame and led the godskin apostles, was never truly defeated in the conventional sense. Her spirit, her influence lay dormant, a smoldering ember waiting for the right conditions to ignite once more. And ignite it did. In the hidden recesses of the lands between, far from the prying eyes of the Golden Order, she began to secretly rekindle the godskin faith. Her methods were subtle at first, whispers carried on the wind, dark omens interpreted by the desperate and the disenfranchised. Her remaining apostles, those who had survived the initial cataclysmic defeat at the hands of Malekith, the Black Blade, and the rise of the Golden Order, were scattered like ash across the continent. Many had gone into deep hiding, their faith a dangerous secret. Others had perhaps even feigned conversion, biding their time. But with the gloam-eyed queen's renewed influence, a subtle, almost telepathic call, they began to regroup. It was a slow, insidious process, like a disease spreading through the body of the lands between. These apostles, hardened by defeat and fueled by a burning desire for revenge against the Golden Order and its false divinity, sought out new recruits, preying on those disillusioned with Marika's reign, those who felt abandoned or oppressed. They spoke of true gods, of a power beyond the Golden Order's grasp, of the cleansing fire of the Black Flame. Their targets were strategic, chosen to undermine the very foundations of the Golden Order's power. The Godskin Apostles began to target minor Erd Tree offshoots and nascent divine beings, seeing them not as expressions of true divinity, but as blasphemous imitations. These were often smaller, localized manifestations of the Erd Tree's power, perhaps a sapling that had taken root in a particularly sacred grove, or a minor deity worshipped by a remote village, whose power derived ultimately from the Erd Tree's grace. For the Godskins, these were affronts, pale imitations of the true divine, which they believed resided in the very flesh of gods, waiting to be flayed and consumed. They would descend upon these sites with ruthless efficiency, their black flame searing away the golden grace, leaving behind only charred earth and terror. Each successful raid was a message, a declaration of intent, a reminder that their ancient power, their god-slaying purpose, was far from extinguished. Meanwhile, in the desolate and unforgiving expanse of the mountaintops of the giants, a region steeped in ancient, primordial power and largely untouched by the Golden Order's direct influence, a hidden godskin cult began to take root. This particular sect was drawn by the raw, destructive potential of the flame of ruin, the searing primordial fire that burned eternally within the forge of the giants. This was no ordinary flame. It was the very essence of destruction, a force capable of burning the Erd Tree itself. For the Godskins, whose entire dogma revolved around the flaying and consumption of gods, this flame represented a potent tool, a source of power that could amplify their own black flame and aid in their ultimate goal of consuming all divinity. They studied its properties, seeking to understand its destructive principles, perhaps even dreaming of harnessing its power for their own apocalyptic ends. Their presence in the mountaintops was a stark reminder of the Godskins' adaptability, their willingness to embrace even the most dangerous of powers in pursuit of their faith. Back in the more populated, if still unsettling, regions of the lands between, a particularly cunning Godskin noble, known only as the Stitched, began to gather followers in the windmill villages of the Altus Plateau. These villages were already steeped in a macabre tradition, where frenzied villagers danced and celebrated, often flaying the skin of others in their ecstatic rituals. The Stitched, a master manipulator and a terrifying figure adorned with the flayed skin of countless victims, saw in these villagers a fertile ground for his own brand of twisted devotion. He exploited their existing frenzy-worshipping tendencies, subtly twisting their rituals to align with Godskin practices. He promised them true ecstasy, a deeper connection to the divine through the act of flaying, not just of mortals, but of those touched by grace. He spoke of the purity of skin, the sacredness of flesh, and the ultimate transcendence that came from consuming the essence of gods. The windmill villages, already unsettling, became even more so, their dances taking on a darker, more ritualistic edge, their celebrations now tinged with the ominous glow of the black flame. The infiltration wasn't limited to the fringe of society. The Godskin apostles, with their cunning and their mastery of disguise, began to infiltrate the ranks of the Golden Order's lesser clergy. These were often ambitious, disillusioned, or simply naive priests and priestesses who felt overlooked by the higher echelons of the Golden Order. The apostles, masquerading as pious devotees or offering seemingly innocuous spiritual guidance, would slowly corrupt them. They whispered promises of true transcendence, of a power beyond the limited grace of the Erd Tree, a direct communion with a more ancient, potent divinity. They spoke of the ultimate sacrifice, the true path to enlightenment, through flaying, through the shedding of the mortal coil to reveal the divine within. These corrupted clergy, seduced by the allure of power and spiritual superiority, became unwitting agents of the Godskin faith, subtly spreading their doctrines and even facilitating their rituals within the very heart of the Golden Order's influence. The culmination of this resurgence, this insidious spread of the Godskin faith, was a terrifying event. The first recorded black flame ritual in centuries. This wasn't some minor clandestine affair. It was a grand, horrifying ceremony conducted in a forgotten catacomb deep beneath the blighted lands of Kaled. The sacrifice was not merely a commoner, but a demigod's descendant, a direct bloodline to Marika herself. The ritual was meticulously planned, drawing upon ancient Godskin rites and fueled by the collective will of the newly re-established faith. The air in the catacomb would have crackled with dark energy, the chanting of the apostles echoing through the stone, culminating in the horrific act of flaying and the offering of the divine flesh to the rekindled black flame. This act was a profound statement, a direct challenge to the Golden Order, a declaration that the Godskins were back and their hunger for divine flesh was as insatiable as ever. The true significance of this ritual would only be revealed much later through the diligent, if often fragmented, notes of the scholar Rogier. He, through his tireless research into ancient curses and forgotten histories, would uncover the chilling truth. This black flame ritual, performed beneath Kaled, had reignited the Godslayer's black flame. This was the very flame that Malekith, the Black Blade, had supposedly extinguished when he defeated the Glomide Queen and sealed away the Rune of Death. The black flame, a power capable of slaying gods, had been dormant, a mere ember, but this ritual, this sacrifice of divine lineage, had fanned it back into a roaring inferno. It meant that the Godskins once again possessed their most potent weapon, a power that could bring even the mighty demigods of the Erd Tree era to their knees. The implications were catastrophic for the Golden Order. The insidious spread of Godskin practices wasn't limited to religious zealots or hidden cults. Even within the seemingly pristine nobility of the Altus Plateau, a region synonymous with opulence and the Golden Order's direct influence, darkness took root. A prominent noble house, whose name has been lost to the annals of history, or perhaps deliberately erased, secretly adopted Godskin practices. Their motivation was not necessarily religious fervor, but a twisted pursuit of aesthetic and status. They began flaying their servants, not for sacrifice in the traditional sense, but to create living vestments for their apostles. Imagine the horror, the skin of their own household, meticulously prepared and stitched, worn as garments by the Godskin apostles who had infiltrated their ranks. These living vestments were believed to imbue the wearer with a portion of the flayed individual's vitality or essence, a gruesome fashion statement that also served to demonstrate the noble house's extreme devotion and commitment to the burgeoning Godskin faith. It was a chilling example of how the Godskin apostasy could corrupt even the most seemingly civilized corners of the lands between. In their relentless pursuit of power and their quest to consume all divinity, the Godskins were not above exploring other avenues of worship, even if temporarily. For a brief period, a particular Godskin sect turned its attention to the twin bird, an outer god associated with death and the spectral, spirit like creatures that roam the lands between. The twin bird's connection to death, its ethereal and unsettling presence, held a certain appeal for the Godskins, who saw death as a fundamental aspect of their god-slaying purpose. They briefly worshipped this outer god, believing its power could enhance their own mastery over life and death, perhaps even allowing them to flay the very souls of their victims. However, this alliance, if it could even be called that, was short-lived. The twin bird, an entity of quiet, pervasive influence, was ultimately deemed too passive by the aggressive, action-oriented Godskins. Its methods were subtle, its power more akin to a slow decay than a roaring inferno. The Godskins, who craved direct confrontation and the visceral act of flaying, found the twin bird's approach unsatisfying and eventually abandoned its worship, returning to their more direct and violent methods. This period of resurgence, while marked by a unified purpose against the Golden Order, was not entirely without internal strife. A significant schism occurred within the ranks of the Godskin apostles. Some among them, perhaps those who remembered the sheer power of the Dusk-Eyed Queen's original reign, or those who saw an opportunity for increased strength, advocated for allying with the Dusk-Eyed Queen's remaining followers. The Dusk-Eyed Queen, a figure often conflated with the Gloam-Eyed Queen, but distinct in her specific domain over the dusk or twilight aspect of death, still commanded a loyal, if diminished, following. These dissenting Godskins believed that combining forces would create an unstoppable tide against the Golden Order. However, the Gloam-Eyed Queen, now firmly back at the helm and fiercely protective of her rekindled power, saw this as a betrayal, a dilution of her authority, and a dangerous distraction from their true purpose. She would tolerate no rivals, no competing ideologies within her ranks. With ruthless efficiency, she purged these dissenting elements, eliminating those who sought to ally with the Dusk-Eyed Queen's remnants. This act of internal cleansing solidified her control, ensuring that the Godskin apostasy would proceed under her singular, unwavering vision, a vision of pure, unadulterated God-slaying. This brutal consolidation of power set the stage for the next phase of the Godskins' resurgence, a period of intensified conflict and ever-growing horror. The growing confidence of the Godskin cults, fueled by their renewed purpose and the perceived weakness of the Golden Order, manifested in increasingly brazen and strategic maneuvers across the lands between during the Mid-Erdtree era, a period we've termed the Godskin Resurgence. While the Godskin noble in the Shaded Castle was busy cultivating a new generation of followers from Miquella's abandoned faithful, another, more sinister plot was unfolding. Godskin assassins, their movements as fluid and silent as the shadows they embraced, began a systematic hunt for omens. These unfortunate beings, born with physical deformities and cursed by the Golden Order, were believed by the Godskins to possess flesh that, due to its unique properties and the suffering it endured, held the key to perfecting their flaying techniques. The omens' bodies, already considered anathema, became a macabre canvas for the Godskins' horrific artistry, each flayed hide a testament to their twisted pursuit of aesthetic and spiritual perfection. This period saw a dramatic increase in omen disappearances, particularly in the subterranean depths beneath the capital and the catacombs, where many omens were interred or banished. The Godskins, with their innate ability to manipulate the black flame, found that Omen's tough, often horn ridden hides to be a fascinating challenge, each successful flaying adding to their perverse understanding of flesh and spirit. They sought not just to remove the skin, but to understand the very essence of what made an omen, believing that in this understanding lay the path to true divine flaying. Simultaneously, a far more insidious infiltration was underway within the very heart of the Golden Order's power structure. In Landell, the royal capital, a Godskin noble, a high ranking member of the cult, known for their imposing stature and mastery of the Black Flame, successfully murdered and replaced a member of the Round Table Hold's inner circle. The Round Table Hold, a sanctuary for tarnished and a crucial hub for the Golden Order's operations, was considered impenetrable. The noble, likely utilizing their shapeshifting abilities or simply the art of disguise, seamlessly assumed the identity of their victim, gaining access to vital intelligence and sowing discord from within. This act demonstrated a level of strategic cunning previously unseen from the Godskins, moving beyond mere ritualistic violence to calculated political maneuverings. The identity of the replaced individual remains a mystery, but their absence or altered behavior likely contributed to the growing paranoia and instability within the Golden Order's leadership. The Godskin noble, now an unseen puppeteer, could manipulate information, misdirect resources, and potentially even plant false leads, all while gathering intelligence on the Golden Order's weaknesses and the movements of key figures. This deep cover operation highlighted the Godskin's growing ambition, no longer content with mere survival or isolated acts of terror, but actively seeking to undermine the very foundations of the powers that be. Further expanding their reach and influence, the Godskins executed another audacious plan, the hijacking of the first living mausoleum. These colossal walking structures, housing the soulless bodies of demigods, were revered and protected, their movements slow and deliberate across the lands between. The Godskins, however, saw an opportunity. They infiltrated one of these mobile tombs, subduing or eliminating its caretakers, and effectively turned it into a wandering base of operations. The living mausoleum's inherent nature, its constant, unhurried pilgrimage, allowed the Godskins to spread their influence and conduct their dark rituals undetected across vast distances. They could transport their captured victims, conduct their flaying ceremonies, and even recruit new followers in remote areas, all while remaining largely invisible to the Golden Order's increasingly stretched surveillance. The mausoleum became a mobile temple of the Black Flame, its solemn bells now tolling a different, more ominous tune, a haunting accompaniment to the Godskin's gruesome work. This strategic acquisition provided them with an unprecedented level of mobility and secrecy, transforming a symbol of reverence into a tool of terror. The sight of a living mausoleum, once a source of awe, now instilled a creeping dread in those who understood its new, unholy purpose. The burgeoning power and increasingly visible presence of the Godskins did not go unnoticed by all factions. Rani's faction, the enigmatic lunar princess and her loyal followers, took note of the Godskins' resurgence. However, instead of viewing them as a direct threat, Rani, ever the master strategist, deemed them a useful distraction from the Golden Order's gaze. The chaos and fear sown by the Godskins, particularly their attacks on omens and their infiltration of Landell, diverted the Golden Order's resources and attention, allowing Rani's own plans for the Age of Stars to progress with less scrutiny. Rani's faction, operating from the shadows and focused on their own cosmic agenda, understood that a weakened and distracted Golden Order was to their advantage. They likely observed the Godskin's movements, perhaps even subtly manipulating events to further amplify the distraction, but refrained from direct intervention, preferring to let the two opposing forces exhaust each other. This hands off approach demonstrated Ronnie's pragmatic and long term vision, seeing the Godskins not as an enemy to be vanquished, but as a temporary, albeit brutal, tool in her grand design. The Godskins, unknowingly, were serving a purpose far beyond their own understanding of divine flaying, becoming pawns in a larger cosmic game. Meanwhile, in the mystical region of Liurnia of the Lakes, a Godskin cult, drawn to the region's ancient arcane energies and the presence of discarded knowledge, began experimenting with grafting techniques. These techniques, originally developed by the exiles of Castle Morn in the Weeping Peninsula, involved the horrific fusion of multiple body parts onto a single host, creating monstrous, multi-limbed abominations. The Godskins, with their obsession with flesh and its manipulation, saw in grafting a new avenue for their grotesque artistry. They sought to not only flay and wear the skin of their victims, but to actively reshape and combine their bodies, pushing the boundaries of what was considered living flesh. This fusion of Godskin ideology with grafting techniques resulted in even more terrifying creations, hybrid beings of flayed skin and grafted limbs, each a testament to the cult's depraved ingenuity. They likely abducted travelers and unsuspecting individuals from the surrounding areas, subjecting them to these horrifying experiments in hidden laboratories and forgotten ruins. The goal was not just power, but a deeper, more perverse understanding of the body's potential, a way to further emulate the divine act of creation and destruction, albeit through a lens of pure horror. These grafted Godskin horrors, though perhaps less numerous, were terrifyingly effective, often appearing as sudden, multi-limbed nightmares in the misty lakes. The pervasive influence of the Godskins even began to corrupt ancient death rites. The dusk-eyed heresy spread among the caretakers of the Deathbirds, the ancient, spectral entities associated with the rune of death. These caretakers, traditionally bound to the preservation of death and the guidance of souls, began to merge Godskin ideology with their ancient practices. They started to believe that by flaying the dead, they could release the true essence of the soul, purifying it through the black flame and offering it directly to the gloam-eyed queen. This twisted interpretation of their duties led to macabre rituals where the bodies of the deceased, instead of being respectfully interred or cremated, were subjected to the Godskins' flaying knives. The black flame, once anathema to the natural cycle of death, became a central element in these corrupted rites, burning away the impurities of the flesh to reveal the true soul within. This heresy represented a profound corruption of ancient traditions, demonstrating the Godskins' ability to insidiously infiltrate and pervert existing belief systems, bending them to their own dark will. The Deathbirds themselves, ancient and mysterious, seemed to remain impassive, their eerie cries echoing over these new, unholy ceremonies, perhaps a lament for the desecration of their sacred duties. The Godskins' growing audacity and their deep infiltration into various societal layers inevitably led to conflict. A secret war erupted between Godskins and the all-knowing spies within the Round Table Hold's underground networks. Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing, a master of information and espionage, had established a vast network of informants and agents, meticulously gathering intelligence on all factions in the lands between. The presence of a disguised Godskin noble within the Round Table Hold, coupled with the Godskins' increasingly bold actions, triggered Gideon's counterintelligence efforts. His spies, operating in the shadows beneath the hold, began to uncover the Godskins' plots, leading to skirmishes and assassinations in the labyrinthine tunnels and hidden chambers. This underground conflict was a brutal, silent war fought with daggers and dark magic, where information was as deadly as any blade. Gideon sought to expose and neutralize the Godskin threat, not out of moral conviction, but because their unpredictable nature and growing power destabilized the delicate balance he sought to maintain. The Godskins, in turn, saw Gideon's network as an obstacle to their expansion, a web of eyes and ears that needed to be blinded and silenced. The clash between these two shadowy forces added another layer of intrigue and danger to the already treacherous landscape of the Round Table Hold. The gloam-eyed queen, the enigmatic leader and deity of the Godskins, herself made a rare and terrifying appearance, personally intervening to further her dark agenda. Near the very roots of the Erdtree, the colossal golden tree that defines the lands between, she flayed a finger reader. Finger readers, revered figures who communicate with the two fingers and interpret their divine pronouncements, were considered sacred. The Queen's act was a profound sacrilege, a direct challenge to the Golden Order's authority, and a horrifying display of her power. The flayed skin of the finger reader, imbued with the Queen's black flame and her divine essence, became the first silent vestment. These chilling garments, worn by the highest ranking Godskin apostles, granted them enhanced abilities and a deeper connection to the black flame, allowing them to channel its destructive power with even greater efficacy. The creation of the silent vestment was not merely an act of terror, but a ritualistic act of creation, a perversion of divine power that solidified the gloam-eyed queen's status as a true deity of destruction and flaying. The very air around the Erd tree's roots, usually filled with the gentle hum of grace, now carried a faint scent of ozone and despair, a testament to the queen's terrifying presence. Inspired by their queen's actions and driven by their growing zeal, Godskin hunters began to specifically target Tarnished, marked by grace. These Tarnished, once exiled from the lands between, were now returning, guided by the light of grace, to challenge the Golden Order and become Elden Lord. The Godskins, however, saw them not as potential rulers, but as prime targets. They believed the Tarnished's returned flesh, having been touched by grace and having journeyed through death, was ripe for harvest. They saw their bodies as possessing unique properties, a blend of life, death, and divine favor that would yield the most exquisite and powerful flayed hides. This new focus on Tarnished led to ambushes and assassinations, particularly in areas where Tarnished were known to gather or pass through. The hunters, with their black flame abilities and their mastery of stealth, became a terrifying new threat for the returning warriors, adding another layer of danger to their already perilous quest. The Godskins were not interested in the Tarnished's destiny, only in the quality of their skin, viewing them as nothing more than a new, highly prized resource for their gruesome craft. The light of grace, meant to guide and protect, now also served as a beacon for these predatory flayers. Finally, in a move that showcased their relentless pursuit of power and their willingness to embrace even the most blasphemous ideologies, a Godskin apostle posed as a recusant in Volcano Manor. Volcano Manor, nestled within the treacherous Metgelmir, was the stronghold of Lord Rykard, the blasphemous, a demigod who had fused himself with a colossal serpent. The Recusants, a faction of Tarnished and others who had forsaken the Erdtree, were dedicated to hunting down other Tarnished and consuming their runes. The Godskin Apostle, under the guise of a fellow Recusant, sought to study Rykard's blasphemies, particularly his use of the Great Serpent's power and his philosophy of devouring the gods. The Apostle believed that Rykard's methods, though antithetical to the Godskin's own divine flaying, might hold secrets that could be synergized with their existing techniques. They sought to understand the limits of flesh manipulation, the power of consuming divine entities, and the potential for new forms of blasphemous transformation. This infiltration of Volcano Manor demonstrated the Godskin's pragmatic and opportunistic nature, willing to learn from even their ideological opponents, if it meant advancing their own twisted goals of fleshly perfection and divine conquest. The apostle, ever watchful, observed Rykard's grotesque rituals, seeking any scrap of knowledge that could further the Glomide Queen's dominion. The Godskin apostasy, already a period of escalating dread, saw its darkest rituals unfold as the Gloam-eyed Queen, the enigmatic leader of the Godskin apostles, made a chilling appearance within the abyssal reaches of Deeproot Depths. This ancient labyrinthine network of roots and forgotten catacombs, a place where the very fabric of the lands between seemed to fray, became the stage for a communion of unspeakable horror. Here, amidst the petrified corpses of gargantuan creatures and the echoing whispers of forgotten deities, the queen was observed communing with what the Godskins refer to as the primeval current of flayed divinity. This concept, central to their twisted theology, posits that the divine essence of gods and demigods, once stripped of their flesh, can be harnessed and consumed. It is a spiritual and literal cannibalism, a means to absorb power and ascend to a higher, albeit grotesque, state of being. The Deeproot Depths, with its proximity to the roots of the Erd Tree and its ancient chthonic energies, was likely chosen for its inherent spiritual potency, a place where the veil between worlds thinned, allowing for a more direct connection to this abhorrent current. The implications of the Queen's presence in such a sacred yet corrupted place sent shivers through the Golden Order, confirming their worst fears about the depth of Godskin ambition. Simultaneously, the Godskins' insidious reach extended even into the hallowed precincts of the Haligtree, Miquella's unblemished creation, a sanctuary meant to nurture and protect all who sought refuge. A dedicated Godskin cult, driven by a fanaticism that bordered on madness, infiltrated the sacred boughs of the Haligtree with a singular chilling purpose: to flay the Albinaurics, the artificial humanoids, as false flesh. To the Godskins, the Albinaurics, born of artificial means rather than natural procreation, represented an affront to their understanding of divinity and the natural order of life and death. Their flesh in the Godskins' warped worldview was not true flesh, and therefore its flaying would be a perversion, a ritualistic act of defiance against what they perceived as an artificial creation. This act was not merely about power, but about a twisted theological statement, a rejection of Miquella's compassion and a defilement of his sacred space. However, their sacrilegious efforts were met with fierce resistance from the Cleanrout Knights, the elite protectors of the Haligtree. These loyal warriors, imbued with the unyielding devotion to Miquella and Malenia, fought with a righteous fury, their golden armor gleaming against the dark robes of the Godskins. The Cleanrout Knights, embodying the Haligtree's protective essence, successfully repelled the invaders, though the incident left an indelible stain on the Haligtree's reputation as an impenetrable sanctuary, a grim reminder that even in places of purest intent, corruption could find a foothold. The Godskins' audacious attempts to reshape the very fabric of existence continued with the Apostle of the Flayed Eclipse, a particularly zealous and powerful Godskin leader, performing a failed ritual at Castle Sol. This ritual, a desperate gamble, aimed to merge the destructive power of the Black Flame, the very essence of their god-slaying abilities, with destined death itself, the ultimate power over life and demise. Castle Sol, a fortress steeped in the melancholic lore of the Eclipse Hotel and its association with the spectral eclipse, was chosen for its inherent connection to death and the fading of light. The apostle believed that by harnessing the cosmic energies of an eclipse, they could amplify the Black Flame's potency, transforming it into an unstoppable force capable of consuming all of creation, not just the flesh of gods. However, the ritual, despite its terrifying ambition, failed spectacularly. The exact reasons for its failure remain shrouded in mystery, but it is speculated that the sheer unbridled power of destined death, a force far beyond even the Godskin's comprehension, proved too volatile to control. The attempt, though unsuccessful, showcased the Godskin's boundless ambition and their willingness to tamper with forces that even the gods themselves held in awe. The relentless pursuit of the Godskins by Malekith, the Black Blade, continued unabated. Driven by his sacred duty to contain destined death and punish those who dared to wield its power, Malekith personally hunted down 3 high-ranking Godskin apostles. These were not mere foot soldiers, but powerful figures within the Godskin hierarchy, likely responsible for orchestrating many of the recent atrocities. Malekith, a being of immense power and unwavering resolve, systematically tracked and eliminated these apostles, his black blade, imbued with the very essence of destined death, proving to be their ultimate undoing. Each encounter was a brutal testament to Malekith's prowess and the terrifying finality of his blade. However, despite his relentless efforts, the elusive glome-eyed queen once again managed to escape his grasp. Her ability to evade the Black Blade, a feat few others could claim, further cemented her reputation as a cunning and formidable adversary, hinting at powers and stratagems that even Malekith struggled to anticipate. Her continued freedom was a constant thorn in Malekith's side, a symbol of the lingering threat that the Godskins posed to the delicate balance of the lands between. As the Godskin apostasy reached its zenith, an internal conflict, a schism, erupted within their ranks, a development that paradoxically offered a brief respite to the beleaguered forces of the Golden Order. The schism centered around a contentious debate whether to ally with the followers of the Formless Mother, the outer god associated with Mog, Lord of Blood, and his blood flame incantations. The Formless Mother, a malevolent entity that revels in wounds, blood, and the grotesque, offered a potent, albeit disturbing, source of power. Some Godskins, particularly those who prioritized raw power and destruction, saw an alliance with the Formless Mother as a logical step, a means to amplify their destructive capabilities and accelerate their goal of flaying godhood. They argued that the Formless Mother's insatiable hunger for sacrifice and her mastery over blood magic aligned with their own rituals of flaying and consumption. However, another faction within the Godskins vehemently opposed this alliance. They believed that the Formless Mother's brand of power was a deviation from their purest theology of flaying and consuming divine flesh. They saw the Formless Mother as a rival, a different path to power that threatened to dilute their own unique identity and purpose. This internal struggle, fueled by theological disagreements and power dynamics, escalated into a brutal purge. The resulting conflict, a horrifying spectacle of Godskin fighting Godskin, significantly weakened both factions. The Godskins, already stretched thin by their wars against the Golden Order and Malekith, found their numbers and influence diminished by this internecine strife. The followers of the Formless Mother, too, suffered losses, their potential alliance with the Godskins dissolving into a bloody internecine conflict. This schism, born of ideological differences, proved to be a critical turning point, temporarily curbing the Godskins' relentless advance and providing a much-needed breathing room for the forces of order. The final recorded event before the cataclysmic shattering of the Elden Ring, a grim testament to the Godskins' enduring cruelty, was the mass flaying of the apostate priests near the Forbidden Lands. This horrific event, a culmination of the Godskins' internal purges and their unyielding fanaticism, targeted those priests who had either defected from the Godskin cause or had been deemed heretical in their interpretation of the flayed divinity. The Forbidden Lands, a desolate and treacherous region leading to the mountaintops of the giants, became the stage for this gruesome spectacle. The Godskins, in a public display of their unwavering commitment to their twisted faith, subjected these apostate priests to a ritualistic flaying, their bodies stripped of their skin as a perverse offering to their dark gods. This act was not merely about punishment, it was a ritualistic cleansing, a reaffirmation of their core beliefs, and a terrifying warning to any who might consider straying from their path. The sheer brutality of the event sent shockwaves through the remaining pockets of resistance, further solidifying the Godskin's reputation for unbridled sadism and unwavering devotion to their cause. It was a dark omen, a final, chilling act before the world itself plunged into chaos. As the Elden Ring, the very symbol of order and prosperity in the lands between, shattered into countless fragments, its golden light extinguished, the Godskins, with a chilling prescience, retreated to their various strongholds. These bastions, scattered across the lands between, from the depths of the divine towers to the forgotten corners of the crumbling Farum Azula, became their sanctuaries. They did not despair at the collapse of the established order. Instead, they awaited the time of flayed godhood promised by their enigmatic queen. For the Godskins, the shattering was not an end, but a beginning, a necessary cataclysm that would pave the way for their ultimate ascension. They believed that the breaking of the Elden Ring, the source of the Golden Order's power, would weaken the very fabric of divinity, making the gods and demigods more vulnerable to their flaying rituals. The chaos and despair that enveloped the lands between were to them a sign that their twisted prophecy was finally coming to fruition. They envisioned a world where the flesh of gods would be their sustenance, where their black flame would reign supreme, and where the gloam-eyed queen would finally achieve her ultimate goal of becoming the sole sovereign of a flayed divine realm. Their retreat was not a surrender, but a strategic repositioning, a patient biding of their time as they prepared for the ultimate harvest of divine flesh in a world now irrevocably broken. The stage was set for the final, horrifying act of their twisted saga, a saga that would unfold in the shattered remnants of the lands between. As the Golden Order's iron grip tightened across the lands between, suppressing dissent and consolidating its power, the seeds of its destruction were already being sown. We left off with the Godskin Apostles, once a terrifying force under the Glomite Queen, having been largely driven underground, their fervent worship of destined death and their practice of skinning gods deemed anathema by Marika's burgeoning faith. This period of relative dormancy, however, was merely a prelude to a cataclysmic resurgence. Our timeline now shifts dramatically, moving into the late Erdtree era, an age defined by chaos, war, and the shattering of everything the Golden Order had painstakingly built. The pivotal event that irrevocably altered the destiny of the lands between was, of course, the shattering itself. In an act shrouded in mystery and debated by scholars even to this day, Queen Marika the Eternal, the very deity who established the Golden Order and sealed away destined death, took it upon herself to shatter the Elden Ring. This cosmic artifact, the very embodiment of the lands between's fundamental laws and the source of the Erdtree's power, fractured into great runes, scattering its influence and plunging the entire realm into an unprecedented era of chaos. The immediate consequence was the abrupt end of the Age of the Erdtree, an era characterized by relative stability and the Golden Order's dominion. The once unquestioned authority of the Erdtree, which had radiated its golden grace across the land, wavered and began to recede, leaving a power vacuum that would soon be filled by ambition, desperation, and ancient grudges. With the Elden Ring shattered, the very fabric of reality seemed to fray. The most immediate and profound impact on the political and spiritual landscape was the sudden silence of the Two Fingers. These colossal, enigmatic entities, believed to be emissaries of the Greater Will, the outer god that bestowed the Elden Ring upon Marika, had long served as conduits for divine guidance and arbiters of fate. Their sudden cessation of communication created a profound spiritual crisis, and more importantly, a tangible power vacuum among the demigods, Marika's direct offspring, and the inheritors of the great runes. Without the guiding hand of the two fingers, or at least their perceived guidance, the demigods were left to their own devices, their ambitions unchecked, and their rivalries intensified. This absence of divine oversight would prove to be a crucial factor in the ensuing conflicts, as each demigod, now possessed of a fragment of the Elden Ring's power, began to vie for supremacy, believing themselves destined to become the next Elden Lord. For the Godskin apostles, this cataclysm was not a disaster, but a divine opportunity. Long suppressed by the Golden Order, their ancient faith driven underground, they had endured centuries of persecution and marginalization. The shattering, with its attendant chaos and the weakening of the Erd Tree's influence, was precisely the kind of upheaval they had perhaps secretly yearned for. It signaled the weakening of their oppressors, and more importantly, the potential return of their beloved destined death. The Godskin apostles, therefore, saw the shattering not as an end, but as their moment to rise, to reclaim their rightful place in the world, and to reassert the terrifying power of the Black Flame. Their dormant cults, once whispered in shadowed corners, now began to stir with renewed fervor, fueled by the prospect of a world free from the Golden Order's suffocating light. With the Golden Order in disarray, the Godskins wasted no time in reactivating their ancient temples and strongholds, places that had once been centers of their dark worship before Marika's ascendancy. Among these were the imposing divine tower of Kaled, a structure whose very architecture seemed to defy the natural order, and the macabre windmill village in Altus Plateau, a place where the grotesque practice of skinning was not merely ritual, but a way of life, a grim testament to their enduring traditions. These locations, once silenced by the Golden Order, now pulsed with renewed, sinister energy. The divine tower of Kyled, with its ominous silhouette against the scarlet, rot-blighted landscape, became a beacon for their resurgence, a place where the black flame could once again be rekindled. The windmill village, with its eerie dancers and the unsettling sound of flaying, served as a chilling reminder of their ultimate goal: to harvest the flesh of gods. These reactivated sites became focal points for their operations, places where they could gather, perform their rituals, and prepare for the coming conflict. The Godskins' resurgence was not entirely self-driven, however. In the shadows of the crumbling Golden Order, unlikely alliances began to form. The nobles of the Eternal Cities, that's those remnants of civilizations like Nokron and Noxtella, which had been cast down by the Greater Will long ago for their perceived blasphemies, saw an opportunity in the Godskins' rebellion. These ancient, subterranean societies, with their mastery of sorcery and their deep-seated resentment towards the Erd Tree and its Golden Order, harbored a long-standing desire for vengeance. They secretly began to supply the Godskin apostles with weapons, crafted with their unique metallurgical skills, and perhaps more crucially, intelligence. This intelligence would have been invaluable, providing the Godskins with insights into the weakened defenses of the Golden Order, the movements of its remaining forces, and the vulnerabilities of the demigods. This clandestine support from the Eternal Cities provided the Godskins with a crucial advantage, allowing them to strike with greater precision and effectiveness against their common enemy. The alliance, though unspoken and hidden, solidified the Godskins' position as a potent force in the unfolding chaos. One of the most surprising and significant alliances forged during this tumultuous period was between the Godskin apostles and Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy. Rykard, one of Marika's demigod children, had long harbored a profound hatred for the Erd Tree and the Golden Order, viewing its tenets as oppressive and its dogma as a lie. His path to blasphemy was a gradual one, culminating in his infamous act of allowing himself to be devoured by the God-devouring serpent, transforming into a monstrous entity that sought to consume all gods. Before this ultimate transformation, however, Rykard found common ground with the Godskin apostles. Their shared hatred for the Erd Tree, their desire to dismantle its influence, and their embrace of forbidden powers made them natural, if temporary, allies. Rykard, from his seat of power within Volcano Manor, provided the Godskins with resources, sanctuary, and perhaps even strategic guidance, recognizing the destructive potential of their fervent devotion to destined death. This alliance amplified the threat posed by both parties, creating a formidable force against the fractured remnants of the Golden Order. Empowered by these alliances and the widespread chaos, the Godskins began to fully embrace their ancient practices. Their most infamous ritual, the hunting and skinning of gods, which had been largely suppressed, now resumed with terrifying ferocity. With the demigods vying for power and often isolated in their strongholds, they became prime targets for the Godskin apostles. The Godskins believed that by flaying the flesh of these divine beings, they could not only create new Godskin garments, imbued with the power of their victims, but also absorb their essence, growing stronger and closer to their ultimate goal, the full restoration of destined death. Each successful hunt was a dark triumph, a ritualistic act that reaffirmed their faith and further fueled their zeal. The sight of a demigod's flayed skin, stretched and fashioned into the distinctive black and white robes of the Godskin apostles, became a chilling symbol of their resurgence and a stark warning to any who dared to stand in their way. This renewed campaign of terror sent shockwaves through the lands between, adding another layer of dread to the already fractured landscape. The alliance with Rykard also provided the Godskins with an unprecedented opportunity for direct observation and study of blasphemy. A particularly cunning Godskin apostle, whose identity remains a mystery, managed to infiltrate the Volcano Manor. This was no mere act of espionage. It was a deeply strategic move. This apostle was not there to simply gather information, but to study Rykard's blasphemous experiments firsthand. Rykard's pursuit of forbidden knowledge, his attempts to transcend mortality through forbidden means, and his ultimate fusion with the god-devouring serpent represented a radical departure from the established order. For the Godskin apostle, these experiments were a fascinating, albeit dangerous, exploration of power beyond the conventional understanding of the Golden Order. They sought to understand the nature of Rykard's blasphemy, to discern how it could be harnessed or adapted to further their own goals of bringing about the age of destined death. The knowledge gained from this infiltration would undoubtedly have provided invaluable insights into alternative methods of challenging divine authority, potentially influencing future Godskin strategies and rituals. Amidst this burgeoning chaos, a subtle but significant shift occurred in the very fabric of power. The Black Flame, the signature power of the Godskin apostles, began to regain some of its lost strength. For centuries, the Black Flame had been significantly weakened, its potency diminished by Malekith's sealing of destined death. Malekith, Marika's shadow-bound beast and the Empyrean's half-brother, had been tasked with containing the Rune of Death, thereby preventing the Black Flame from truly unleashing its full, god-slaying potential. However, the Shattering, by disrupting the fundamental order of the lands between and weakening the Erd Tree's pervasive influence, inadvertently created conditions favorable for the Black Flame's resurgence. The weakening of the Golden Order's spiritual and physical dominion meant that the seals on destined death, while not entirely broken, were certainly less potent. This allowed a trickle of destined death's power to seep back into the world, invigorating the Black Flame and making it a far more dangerous force than it had been in ages. This renewed potency emboldened the Godskins further, making their attacks even more devastating and their presence even more terrifying. As the Godskin apostles solidified their power and influence, their most formidable agents, the Godskin duo, established a new, critical stronghold. They took residence in crumbling Farum Azula, an ancient, crumbling city suspended in a perpetual storm beyond time. This location was not chosen at random. Farum Azula held a profound significance for the Godskins. Within its ancient ruins lay an ancient piece of destined death, a fragment of the very power they sought to unleash upon the world. The Godskin duo's presence there served a dual purpose: to guard this precious relic from any who would seek to further contain or exploit it, and to serve as a powerful symbol of the Godskins' renewed commitment to their dark faith. Their formidable combined power made them near invincible guardians, ensuring that this vital piece of their ultimate goal remained secure amidst the chaos of the shattering. Furthermore, crumbling Farum Azula held another profound spiritual significance for the Godskin cultists. The Gloam-Eyed Queen's original throne, a relic from a forgotten age when she wielded the full power of destined death, was located within its ancient halls. This throne, a symbol of their progenitor's ultimate authority and power, became a pilgrimage site for devout Godskin cultists. They would journey through the treacherous storms and ancient beasts of Farum Azula, driven by their unwavering faith, to pay homage to their queen and to draw inspiration from her legacy. This pilgrimage reinforced their collective identity, rekindled their zeal, and served as a constant reminder of the ultimate destiny they sought to achieve: the return of the Gloam-Eyed Queen and the complete unsealing of destined death. The presence of the Godskin duo and the sacredness of the Queen's throne transformed Farum Azula into a spiritual heartland for the resurgent Godskin apostles, a place where their past, present, and future converged. As the late Erdtree era descended further into chaos, the Godskins, emboldened by their initial successes, began to spread their influence with a terrifying efficiency. We find a particularly poignant and perhaps disturbing account of this period through the eyes of Zorias, Rykard's adopted daughter. Within the labyrinthine depths of Volcano Manor, a place already steeped in dark rituals and forbidden practices, Zorias bore witness to the Godskins' growing presence. Her meticulous, if often horrified, observations detailed their increasingly elaborate rituals, the chilling precision of their flaying techniques, and the burgeoning reverence they commanded from certain factions within the manor itself. She documented their growing influence, not just through direct participation in their rites, but also through the subtle shifts in the manor's power dynamics, noting how even some of Rykard's more pragmatic followers began to entertain the notion of aligning with these zealous skin collectors. Her records, found much later, paint a picture of a cult not merely surviving, but thriving, even within the shadow of a demigod who himself courted forbidden power. Concurrently, demonstrating a strategic cunning often underestimated, a Godskin noble was dispatched to the divine tower of Liurnia. This wasn't merely an act of territorial expansion, but a calculated move to undermine the very fabric of the Golden Order's control over the region. The divine towers, as you know, are crucial conduits of power, linked directly to the great runes and thus to the very essence of the Erdtree's dominion. The noble's mission was clear: corrupt the tower's intricate mechanisms, its seals and wards, effectively weakening its connection to the established order. This infiltration was a subtle, insidious act, a slow poison rather than a direct assault. The noble, likely employing a combination of black flame sorcery and perhaps even some form of dark incantation, began to tamper with the tower's internal workings, its arcane circuits, and protective enchantments. The goal was not immediate destruction, but rather a methodical subversion, preparing the ground for a later, more decisive strike. The implications of this would resonate deeply with the fate of Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, and the very stability of Liurnia. Further afield, the Godskins established a hidden outpost beneath the seemingly innocuous Windmill Village. This location, known for its macabre yet strangely joyful celebrations of the freshly flayed, provided the perfect cover for their clandestine operations. The villagers, in their grotesque dances and ritualistic practices, inadvertently served as a human shield, their bizarre traditions masking the true horror beneath. It was here, in the shadowy depths beneath the spinning blades of the windmills, that the Godskins could conduct their darker rites, store their collected skins, and perhaps even train new recruits away from prying eyes. The juxtaposition of the village's outwardly cheerful, if unsettling, festivities with the grim reality of the Godskin presence below highlights their ability to exploit existing societal eccentricities, turning them into veils for their insidious agenda. This outpost became a vital logistical hub, a place where the spoils of their conquests could be processed and prepared, further fueling their ambition. Amidst this rising tide of black flame, even Ronnie the Witch, ever the pragmatist in her pursuit of destiny, briefly considered an alliance with the Godskins. Her ambition to cast off the Greater Will's influence was absolute, and she was not above employing unconventional means to achieve her ends. The Godskins, with their potent black flame and their fervent desire to dismantle the established order, presented a formidable, if morally repugnant, potential ally. It is plausible that emissaries were sent, or secret parleys held, where the merits and drawbacks of such a pact were weighed. Ronnie, however, ultimately rejected their methods. While she sought to sever ties with the Golden Order, she did not seek to replace it with the chaotic, destructive worship of a new, skin-clad pantheon. Her vision, though dark in its own way, was one of order and destiny, not of indiscriminate flaying and the revival of ancient vengeful deities. The sheer brutality and nihilistic tendencies of the Godskins, their utter disregard for life beyond its utility as a vessel for skin, proved too much even for the stoic and calculating witch. She recognized that their path, while offering power, would lead to a different kind of servitude, one antithetical to her own aspirations for true freedom from external influence. The Godskins, undeterred by Ronnie's refusal, continued their campaign of terror. A particularly gruesome act occurred in the Weeping Peninsula, where a Godskin apostle assassinated a minor demigod. The identity of this demigod remains shrouded in mystery, perhaps a lesser scion of Marika's lineage, or a powerful figure who had attained demigod status through other means. The apostle, a master of the Black Flame's swift and deadly power, executed their target with chilling efficiency. To further send a message, and to desecrate the very symbols of the Golden Order, the apostle left the demigod's flayed body draped over a statue, a grotesque banner of their growing power. This act was not merely about eliminating a potential threat, it was a declaration, a visceral display of their contempt for the established divine hierarchy and a stark warning to any who might oppose them. The image of the lifeless, skinless form adorning a sacred effigy would have sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened warriors, a testament to the Godskins' unyielding cruelty and their unwavering devotion to their dark creed. The resurgence of the Godskins did not go unnoticed by other ancient powers. The Black Flame monks, long dormant and thought to be a relic of a bygone era, began to resurface in Caelid. These monks, adherents to the ancient faith of the Gloam-eyed Queen, had preserved the knowledge and practice of the Black Flame through generations, often in secret enclaves. Now, sensing the renewed vigor of their brethren and the opportune moment to strike against the weakened Golden Order, they emerged from their hidden sanctuaries. Their appearance in Caelid, a land already scarred by the Scarlet Rot and rife with conflict, added another layer of devastating power to the Godskin uprising. They brought with them not only their martial prowess and mastery of the black flame, but also their deep understanding of its ancient rituals and lore, providing a crucial spiritual and tactical backbone to the more overtly aggressive Godskin apostles and nobles. Their reemergence signaled a deeper, more organized threat than many had initially perceived, suggesting a coordinated effort to bring about the return of their dark goddess. This resurgence of the Black Flame, however, did not escape the notice of one of the most formidable guardians of the Golden Order, Malekith, the Black Blade. As Marika's shadow and the keeper of the Rune of Death, Malekith possessed an innate sensitivity to the very essence of destined death, and the Black Flame was its most potent, if uncontrolled, manifestation. Sensing the growing power of this ancient, forbidden fire, Malekith began his relentless hunt for the Godskins. His fury was absolute, his purpose singular, to eradicate any who dared wield the power he was sworn to contain. He descended upon Limgrave, a region already reeling from the initial chaos of the Shattering, and unleashed his devastating power. Several Godskins, caught in his righteous wrath, met their end at the tip of his cursed blade, their black flames extinguished by the very essence of death they sought to command. These encounters were brutal, swift, and left no survivors, serving as a stark reminder that even in their ascendance, the Godskins faced an enemy of unparalleled power and unwavering resolve. Despite Malekith's intervention, the Godskins, ever audacious, managed to achieve a significant victory. They stole a fragment of the Rune of Death. This wasn't a direct confrontation with Malekith, but rather a cunning infiltration of a hidden catacomb nestled deep within the treacherous mountaintops of the giants. These catacombs, often forgotten and obscured by the unforgiving landscape, sometimes held ancient relics or fragments of power long thought lost. The Godskins, perhaps guided by ancient texts or whispered legends, located a repository where a sliver of the Rune of Death, or perhaps an artifact imbued with its essence, had been secreted away. This acquisition was a monumental triumph for them, granting them a direct, albeit limited connection to the very power that Malekith guarded. It amplified their black flame, making it even more potent and difficult to counter, and further fueled their belief in the eventual return of the Glomide Queen, who, as you know, was once the original wielder of destined death. This stolen fragment became a focal point of their rituals, a source of immense power, and a symbol of their growing defiance against the established order. However, even within their ranks, the Godskins were not a monolithic entity. The very success they experienced began to sow the seeds of internal discord, leading to a significant schism among their factions. One prominent faction remained steadfast in their original purpose, the fervent desire to revive the Glomide Queen. For them, every skin flayed, every prayer uttered, every act of destruction was a step towards restoring their ancient goddess to her rightful place. They believed that only through her return could true order, as they understood it, be established. Conversely, another faction began to emerge, one driven by a more pragmatic and perhaps even more terrifying ambition. These Godskins sought not merely to revive an old god, but to find new gods to skin. They were driven by a desire for perpetual power, a hunger for divine essence that transcended the singular goal of their queen's return. This faction saw the chaos of the Shattering as an unprecedented opportunity to ascend to a new level of power, to flay the very demigods themselves, and perhaps even claim their great runes, forging a new pantheon of skin-clad deities. This ideological divide, while not immediately leading to open warfare,